Hey guys, my name's Man Parrish and welcome to my channel. And what is this? Well, I'm a record producer. I'm pretty much established. I've been in the record business for 45 years as an artist and a producer. I've sold 5 million records on my own, which is a big deal for a dance artist back in that day. And I'm also in Grand Theft Auto 1 and 3 video games, so that's another 80 million records. So 85 million people have my music in their hands. I've worked with people like Boy George, Michael Jackson, Gloria Gaynor. I even managed the Village People for 6 years. So I got a lot of crazy road stories and famous people stories and some really sad stories about people dying in my arms. My mom was schizophrenic and I had a crazy, insane, abusive childhood and even sexually abused by a doctor. I'm just going to tell it all. I'm trying to write a book, and it's been 3 years, and publishers and writers and managers are saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't say this. Well, you know what? I've kind of had it, and I just want to present it here to you on YouTube, direct, unedited from my mouth, so you can hear what's going on. I was just accepted a little while ago 3 pieces of my music into the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in New York City, very prestigious. They took my 1983 music video and 2 film scores that I did. So things are going really, really great. If you please would subscribe and hit that little bell icon, then when I post up new stuff, you're going to be the first people to see it. Well, this is a little journey and maybe a big journey. It's up to you guys. And please share it with your friends if you think this is cool. You know, say, hey, look what I saw today. Let them share it and ask them to share it. And I want to get my stories out there. I left home at 14 years old and lived in the street. I was homeless and poor. And I went from flying the Concorde to being broke and back and forth again. So this is my story. And I hope you like it. And thanks for stopping by. Subscribe, bell, please. Love you. Chic, Le Freak, Gloria Gaynor, Don't Leave Me This Way, the Bee Gees, Carol Douglas, Doctor's Orders, the Village People. What am I talking about? I'm talking about, what am I talking about? Disco, the height of disco, and what an incredible trip it was. I got to play the legendary Studio 54, the epitome, the top. You don't go any higher than that. Twice. The first time there was a girl named Madonna, who was a nobody. She just had her first song out, and she was my opening act. And I got to play the second time for George Lucas for the Return of the Jedi premiere opening party in New York City. So, let's rewind. I had a loft on 38th Street, and Joey Arias was one of my 5 roommates. Joey worked at a place called Fiorucci, which a lot of people will remember. It was an Italian designer store up on 59th Street, right around the corner from Bloomingdale's and Lexington Avenue. And Joey was the guy with the red hair. I'll see if I could find a video clip. Maybe I could find a video clip where Joey and Klaus performed in the window of studio, and Joey was like the head salesperson over there. My record was out, and Fiorucci had, I don't know if it's a 10th or the 15th anniversary party for Fiorucci. And since they were a designer, they were the who's who of people invited to this party. So Joey came up to me and said, would you like to be the performing act for the Fiorucci party at Studio 54? And I was like, oh my God, yeah. So I want to say right now, if it wasn't for Joey Arias, and you can Google him, he's a legend in New York City. If it wasn't for Joey Arias, the Man Parrish look that you guys know, with the cape and the makeup, the graffiti jackets, Joey Arias and Adrian Richards pulled all that together. Those are the 2 guys you see in my video. truly, truly amazing, incredible guys. Joey was friends with Kanzai Yamamoto, who is the designer who did the David Bowie outfits with the stripes that go down with the bold legs. And he was a Japanese designer, did all of Bowie's outfits, a lot of Bowie's Ziggy Stardust outfits. And Joey knew him, and Joey managed to get a black jumpsuit that I had that was made out of corduroy, and like I can only say it's like a Darth Vader cape. Let's put it that way, with a hood. And Joey and Adrian were in two plastic graffiti jackets, and on the bottom they had these skirts, and they used to twirl, and the skirts would come out like twirling dervishes. And when I had the cape over my head, I would start the show, and the smoke would be piped up through the cape and come out over the keyboard under a blue light and then fill the stage up. And Adrian had made this incredible, we were into the Dark Crystal, this incredible puppet. And it took Joey and Adrian, I think, was it Joey was behind, or Adrian? I think Adrian was behind running the mouth of the puppet. And then Joey did the hands of the puppet. Adrian running the mouth with, this thing over it. And it would come out and walk through the smoke and find me on stage billowing all the smoke and pull my hood off. And there I was, all spray painted. Joey had glitter spray. It was like hairspray with glitter. And my whole face was gold glitter, looking like a robot. Joey and Adrian were amazing. I mean, we did some amazing, amazing shows. So I said yes to the Studio 54 show. And a few days before the show, I got news that my mother died. And it was like, oh my God, okay, I don't want to put off Studio 54. Let's just see how this works out. Well, it turned out that I went from the cemetery, putting my mother in the ground, getting in a car, coming to the back door of Studio 54 in the mid-afternoon to do a dress rehearsal for the show that night. I mean, I was a complete and utter vegetable, right? So, I met with the manager, and we're standing there, and Joey and Adrian, and what do you want to do? And I said, what do you mean? Do you want to make an entrance? And I was just out of my mind. I looked up the ceiling and said, I want to come down from up there. He said, no problem, hang on. This little guy comes out, and he goes, okay, I'm going to fly you. And I said, fly me? He goes, yeah, we're going to lower this little bar. You're going to sit on it. We're going to take you all the way up there, and then I'm going to lower you. And I said, I'm 6'4". I was about 165 pounds, 70 pounds, skinny, but still, this guy was 3 feet tall. He goes, don't worry, we counterweight you. I'm really lifting 5 pounds. Okay, whatever. So we did a rehearsal. We didn't do the flying thing. We left. I went home. We got changed. Kike Rivera drove the van. We all got into the van. I don't know if we met at my loft or we picked people up along the way. We went to the back door at Studio 54. The guy wouldn't let us in because he didn't know who we were. And I'm banging on the door. And, what do you want? I said, I'm Man Parrish. I don't care who you are. Got to go around the front. I said, I'm the act. He goes, yeah, right. Anyway, after banging on the door, they finally let us in. We go upstairs to the dressing room, and we're kind of getting ready. I think we went on at midnight. Madonna, some girl named Madonna, and I remember her from the Funhouse, come to think of it, but I didn't put two and two together. Anyway, she was going on at when she was at the Funhouse, she didn't have the record, so I didn't make the association. She was going on around 2 or 3 o'clock, and the main act would go on at the height of the evening, 12, 1 o'clock, and the opening act would go on 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They would sort of like throw in an extra show, but by then a lot of people had left. had left. So we're in the dressing room about 45 minutes before we're going to get ready, and Madonna tells one of my guys, or did she come in the dressing room? Anyway, she said, there's been a change in schedule, that she's going on first, and I was going to go on later. And I was disappointed, but you know what? I was pretty cool about it. You know what I mean? Things happen. Okay, I'm at Studio 54. Fine, as long as I'm there, I'm having a ball, because I used to go every weekend, and here I am now performing there. So everybody split up and went into the room. And about 20 minutes before we're supposed to go on, or 15 minutes, the stage manager comes up and says, 15 minutes. I said, what do you mean 15 minutes? He goes, you're going on in 15 minutes. Where is everybody? Weren't you guys ready? And I said, well, told us that, you know, they're going on first, not us. He goes, are you kidding me? That bitch, you go find everybody. And I remember running through the club, trying to find Joey, trying to find Adrian. There were a woman, Kim, and she had brought her kids with her because they were performing on the stage. I'll explain that in a second. And I had to pull everybody together, and there's some yelling and screaming and all that kind of stuff, you know, down the hallway. So we get in the dressing room. We can't find the Kansai Yamamoto jackets. They're plastic. And we're going crazy, and somebody hit our jackets, and they're looking for them. I said, go next door to the town dressing room. No. And then one of the dancers came in, her dancers, and she said, you'll find the jackets hidden behind the radiator down the hall. These are old New York City buildings, and how they heated them in the wintertime was through steam heat and had radiators, and they were plastic put behind the radiators, and they were starting to melt. So we got them out, we plunged them into cold water, dried them off, and they put on the clothes. And we're about a half hour late, but at Studio 54, nobody really cared because no one knew the show was going to happen. Studio 54 had a stage, and then they took the, what was the theater where the seats are, and they continued from the stage, and they just put wood all the way out to the back wall. In other words, the seats would be underneath the dance floor if that was the case. They took the seats out, but if you're going to look at it, they took the seats out from the dance floor. They had the dance floor was the whole, you know, downstairs orchestra seating part that went all the way to the stage. And because they had the stage and all these scenery, these sets, I mean, literally a house would drop down over you as you're dancing, and then suddenly you're inside like this set of a house and people are outside dancing, looking in the window with the doors open. You could walk in and out, and then the next song that would come up, and it was on TV. There was a famous a moon, and a Coke spoon would come to the moon, and the moon would take a sniff, and these little lights would light up, and its brain would go crazy. And it had there was a balcony, a catwalk balcony that was on wheels, and they could remotely control it, and you could dance on the balcony and would ride back and forth over the dance floor. Now, Studio 54 was a very tiny space. They think it's this big giant mega disco, but I'd say half the clubs, out there are probably bigger than Studio. Studio was a small theater that they converted over. So when you went into Studio 54, you're going, oh, this is not that big. And it wasn't that big, but it was incredibly exclusive. There was, when you walked in, there were the gold doors, and then there was this black hallway with pin spots, and you could hear the music. And as you turned the corner, right there, I guess they took the walls down. Under what was the balcony was a bar, and then there's some steps that went down. On either side there were banquettes, upholstered with like silver. Well, they changed it every year for 3 years, but that's what I call the Rat Pack. The Rat Pack would hang out there almost all the time. Andy Warhol, Liza Minnelli, Diana Vreeland, Truman Capote, Mick Jagger, Bianca Jagger, Halston. I got to go through all these. There's Lee Majors, the $6 Million Man, and Farrah Fawcett. They were all there the night I performed, including Henry Kissinger. Now, there's a famous photo where Henry Kissinger is dancing with Brooke Shields. But when we were there, he danced with this girl that wasn't a girl. I think it was Putasa. And if you're really an old school New York, gay dude, you remember that name from the late 60s, early 70s. She was this, I don't think she was a sex change because they weren't available then, but she was this incredible looking Spanish girl. I mean, like gorgeous fashion model, but she had balls. And she went up to Henry Kissinger and asked him for a dance. And here's this beautiful girl, and he's dancing with her. And, Henry, there's photographers here. That's not a real girl. She probably had lower hanging balls than he did. Let's put it that way, all right? I mean, so he wound up dancing with Brooke Shields for a camera that night to make up for the mistake that he made. But you know what? Back in those days, nobody really cared. It wasn't that big of a deal. Everybody's so uptight now. It's just freaking ridiculous with all this shaming and all this stuff. That's a whole other story. But It was a crowd full of celebrities. So finally, we straighten out when I'm supposed to go on, and they pull down a scrim, a piece of scenery that blocked the top part of the stage. They had set up a portable stage, and that's where we were performing. I had a dry ice machine. We used to take 50 pounds, 100 pounds of dry ice, drop it in this special machine, which was boiling water, and it had a fan. All the smoke would come up, and it'd blow it out through a tube on the stage, and I was coming down from the ceiling. So I had the Kansai Yamamoto jumpsuit on, which was so hot. I mean, this is thick corduroy. I had underwear on underneath, and they lowered down this little trapeze swing, and the bar was like maybe that big around, like nothing. And I'm on this corduroy, and they set me on the swing, and he says, do not swing back and forth. He says, there's thousands of volts of neon up there, because some of the scenery they dropped down had neon. He says, if you hit that neon, it's going to shatter down on the floor all over people, and you'll be electrocuted and die. And I thought, you're telling me this now? And he said, don't worry, it's all under control. Now, this trapeze did not have wrist straps like you see in the circus. I was just holding on. So they get me on this thing, they lift me up, and I'm going up, and I'm going up, and I'm going up, and I'm going up. I think the balcony was on the 3rd or 4th floor. I must have been 5 or 6 or 7 stories high. I mean, people were this big below me. Oh, he said, you're gonna go on in 4 minutes right after the record stops. Okay, we're gonna walkie-talkie, the guy in the DJ booth and let him know after the song. He said, okay. We get up there, and it's boiling hot. In those days, it was the big 1,000-watt light bulbs that lit everything, and all that heat rose. And I'm in this cape, and it's coming underneath the cape, and it's so hot. There's salt, sweat and salt and makeup running into my eyes, and I'm hanging on to this thing, and my hands are wet, and I'm starting to slip, and I'm in this corduroy jumpsuit with a corduroy cape, and this whole thing starts happening where I start slipping, and I have to get myself back up on the thing, and it's starting to swing back and forth, and the neon is right over here, and I'm looking down, there's neon back there, and I'm slipping and holding on. 4 minutes goes by, 7 minutes goes by, 12 minutes goes by, nothing. They put on the next song. Another song comes on, the 3rd song, and I had a panic attack. I start screaming. People were this big, and I'm looking down going, help, help, because I thought they'd forgotten me up there. I'm screaming my breath, get me out of here. And I really freaked out. It was like 12 o'clock. I thought I'd be up there until 5 o'clock in the morning, until the music stopped. And sometimes the music stopped at 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, until they suddenly realized, oh, right. Oops, we forgot. We left him up there. So the music stopped all of a sudden. I thought, thank God, they're going to lower me. Slowly, I come down. I had an intro piece. You go past the Proscenium March, and this bright light hits me. I can't see anything. And I look down, and I could see the smoke, which is supposed to be this far across the stage. Well, the guy that was running the smoke machine was a terrible alcoholic. And he turned the switch on, turned around, was drinking, and walked away. So instead of having this much smoke, how tall am I? I'm 6 feet, 7. There must have been 10 feet of smoke. Now, I thought the stage was up there at 10 feet when it was actually 10 feet lower down here. And I decided to make an entrance. I was going to jump off that thing a little bit ahead of time. The cape would billow out, and I would land, on this smoke. Well, it turned out I was 15 feet, 20 feet in the air. I jump off, and I'm like, there's no bottom, and I disappear like in an Esther Williams movie when she goes into the pool with all the smoke. I disappear into the smoke. The smoke's over our head, and the music's playing. Man-Made comes on, and Joey and Adrian are on stage with this creature, and we had Kim, who we used to call Woman Parrish, and her 2 kids were walking through, with lanterns trying to find me. What was supposed to be ankle-high smoke is now smoke, that far over their heads. They're trying to find me, and the music's playing really loud, and I'm going, nobody go near the edge of the stage, nobody get hurt, And the audience is cheering and going crazy. This art performance and smoke and music's coming out of the smoke, and they could see lanterns and shadows of people moving in the smoke and stuff like that. And by the end of the song, it finally cleared. We went into hip hop, bebop, and stuff like that. So that was quite a trip playing at Studio 54. They invited me back a second time because it was so fabulous and all these celebrities saw it. George Lucas asked that I play for the Return of the Jedi party. It was the opening premiere of Return of the Jedi in New York City. Probably Google the date of that and you could figure out the date at Studio 54. They had rented it out exclusively and they were doing a premiere party. And for that one, no coming down from the ceiling. I learned my lesson. I stood on the balcony and they had this massive laser. I remember they had it in the back and it had to be cooled by water or something. And the tube was a fiber optic tube this big around. And they gave me this laser, which looked like a fire hose. And the guy said, don't point it into the audience because you'll either blind people or burn their skin. And I'm like, why do you tell me this stuff the last minute before I'm supposed to go on? Why don't you tell me this while I'm getting ready so I know? He goes, we have a bunch of balloons, clusters of balloons set up, around the club, and just pass it through the balloons and we'll hit a button and we'll blow up the balloons because your costume looks like Darth Vader. You're going to look like you have a giant lightsaber. And out of it came this giant beam and they smoked up the room. And as I was singing, I guess it must have been man-made, I'm swinging this laser and lightsabering through these balloons in the room with Studio 54. I'm very, 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 very lucky to have not only got into Studio 54 every weekend. My friend Linda used to make pretty eyes to the doorman Mark. So we got in no matter how big the party, how exclusive the party. It's like, hi, Mark, and Linda and I got in. Linda would sew clothes. Linda Gerasi, she'd sew clothes every weekend. And I remember she made these outfits out of silver material, but the material wasn't waterproof. We used to drive, and she had a Gremlin or a Pacer or something like that. And we would drive and park at the municipal parking lot next to Studio 54 on 54th and 8th. There was a municipal parking lot in the corner, and Studio 54 was the next building in. And in that basement was a big recording studio where groups like Toto recorded and stuff like that. But we would wait for a limo, and we would run up alongside the limo, and the moment the door opened, we would come out from the street into the crowd like we were coming out of a limo. So this guy, Mark, thought we were like these rich kids because we always appeared in a limo. And he always let us in because it was very exclusive. As you know, people couldn't get in and stood outside and all that kind of stuff. So that was really, really cool. So one day it rained, and this material had just started like saran wrap, like cellophane wrap in front of a hairdryer. It just started crinkling up, and Linda's dress got shorter, and my thing and it started dripping blue ink over this silver stuff. Oh God, it was amazing. It was just and my hair was purple one day and green the next when people didn't have it. It was just such a trip, really such a trip. Madonna was my opening act. She went on at 3 o'clock in the morning, wasn't happy with it. Then we played a place called the Red Parrot in New York City, and I had John Carter with me from Boogie Down Bronx and a couple of B-boys, breakdancing, and they had accidentally put Madonna's food tray in our dressing room, and those guys devoured it, and she blew up over that. And I was on Soul Sonic Force was on first, I was on second, and then again Madonna was on about 2 o'clock in the morning when half the place had emptied, and she got on the microphone and now I'm on, and she wound up like complaining to the audience that Soul Sonic Force and I ruined the audience and exhausted them for her show. You know what I mean? She was miserable and all that kind of stuff. So poor thing. And then we played out in the Hamptons together, and I have a poster for that. I think I played Friday and she played Saturday or something like that, and her picture's above and mine's below. I think that was something that she demanded that time because of the other two times. I'll see if I can find that and post that on Facebook. It's out there somewhere. Anyway, I'm so lucky I got to play at Studio 54. We went every weekend. There was a famous thing where a woman comes in like Lady Godiva, completely nude, with hair covering her private parts, side saddle on a horse, just come in and leave. There was a famous drag queen called Rollerina who dressed up with cat's eye glasses, a little pillbox hat, a kind of like Cinderella fairy godmother, and roller skates, and would just come flying through and christen everybody, and like, what the hell is that? And then take off again. People used to go up in the balcony and do coke and have sex, and supposedly underneath the dance floor is where they stashed all the money and the cocaine and all that. And the fall of Studio 54, by rumor, and I think it's true, Steve Rubell was on, I think, the Dick Cavett show or somebody's show, and said something about, well, you must have made a lot of money. There must be a lot in taxes. He said, oh, we don't pay taxes. We're Studio 54. Well, the place got shut down right after that. They actually, Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager, wound up opening the Palladium, which was Studio 54 2.0, and I've got stories on my Boy George thing about that, playing there on stage with Boy George Marilyn, Jocelyn Brown, Diva Gray, and Michael Rudetsky, who's gone now, myself. That's a whole other story. Well, anyway, I was lucky to be alive. It was a great time in music. It was a great time to be alive. Nobody gave the F about what you did. And music was cool. The people were even cooler. We wound up going back to Halston's house, and everybody's I didn't do coke, but everybody was on the couch doing coke and getting high and all that kind of stuff. That's in another story. But it's pretty cool stuff. Thanks again. This is season 4, episode 1. This is our 40th video. I'm starting the season off on a good one. There's going to be some heavy stuff this season coming down the pike. Not so happy stuff, but I got to tell it all. Thanks, guys. Keep watching. Subscribe, like, and thank you. Hey. This is one of those stories that are not one of the more uplifting ones, but it's part of my life, and I'm going to tell it. The title says I lived with a spaceman and pedophile. Well, I need to explain all of that. Obviously, that's a crazy title, but I think once you listen to this, you'll understand. If you look at the previous video about Bette Midler, I left home at 14, and I lived with this guy, Steve, and we wound up getting an apartment. He worked in the Continental Baths. I was 14, 15 years old and lied that I was 18 or 19. If you asked me in the same day, the same person, I'd probably tell you 2 different ages. I was 16, 17, 18, 19, depending on what I remembered. I told people the last minute, because I knew if I told people I was 14 and I look a lot older, that people wouldn't, like, get out of here. So I was living with this guy, Steve, and I was a 14-year-old kid, and I did not like, the living situation and all that. Didn't have any money, very poor. I went into Central Park. Little I know I was in the Rambles, which is a cruising area, and some guys following me, and I thought, all right, I'm not here for that right now. I didn't even know it was a cruising area. Anyway, comes up, talks to me, and how old are you? First thing out of his mouth, and I thought, oh boy, yeah, I'm 18. He goes, yeah, you really are, right? And I said, well, anyway, that's my age. He goes, oh, so you want to come back to my place for some hot chocolate and cookies? And he laughed, ha 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 ha, it's a little joke. And I laughed, and we wound up going back to his place and fooled around a little bit. And then in my normal routine afterwards, I would tell my whole life story about how crazy my mother was. I'm living with this guy, Steve, who works at the Continental Bath, so has a yellow dress in his closet, which he claims is his sister's, but he's really his, you know what I mean? Of course, so Bob says, well, you can always move in here. It's a 1-bedroom tiny apartment, 6 West 71st Street, right up on the top floor. There was a tiny, it was probably a studio with a small bedroom, and you could barely walk around the bed. But yeah, come on, I thought, okay. So Steve disappeared one night to go to work. I packed up all my stuff, and I went from 70th Street to 71st Street, 3 avenues over, rang his doorbell, and basically moved in. Bob was 38 years old, and I was 15. So at that time, there was a popular book called Eric von Daniken, Chariot of the Gods, and the theory was that the aliens built the pyramids, and Bob was also into Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. This is before Star Wars, and he was into Eric von Däniken books and all that, and metaphysics, and I could project myself astrally out of my body and fly around the room, and I could see spirits and ghosts, So as a 14-year-old, I kind of go, yeah. But after a couple of months of this kind of brainwashing, I guess it becomes like the Stockholm Syndrome, where you kind of question, well, is this guy for real or not? So he started doing things like, I want you to go into the bedroom. He built a Heathkit stereo. He was into soldering and taught me how to solder, and that's how I built my first synthesizer. But he built a little stereo. He says, I want you to go into the other room because I have to make a broadcast. And I'm like, broadcast? Because I got to make a broadcast. Don't ask questions. Go in the other room. Go in the bedroom. He closes the door. Says, do not come out. Puts the radio on static in between, the FM radio between stations where there's noise. And he starts talking. And he was doing this once every 3 or 4 days. I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm communicating with my fellow Alpha Centaurians on Alpha Centauri. Now, right now, you're rolling your eyes around and laughing. But as a 14-year-old kid in the beginning, I did the same thing. But after several months of these broadcasts and communications, a young kid doesn't have the mental capacity or the support system of somebody else saying, this guy's crazy. And you start questioning what's going on. He had me and him, we had bags packed and left them under the bed because when the aliens come, our bags are ready. We could just grab our bags and get on the spaceship and leave this planet. Okay? And it was much easier for me to pack a bag, put it under the bed than to fight this thing, which I wasn't sure whether it was true or not, because you'd have all kinds of theories that, it's like the flat earth people, you know what I mean? Didn't you know that this, oh yeah, and this and that and this and that. And I got to the point where I had a nervous breakdown because I'm a 14, 15-year-old kid. We had very little money. He worked as a teletype operator. This is before internet. He would send, what equivalent of a fax. It was a teletype. He would send messages overseas from his company to his company's branch. He worked on Wall Street. And he would type out messages and it would go literally through a cable underneath the ocean and wind up on a terminal in London. This is in the 70s. I got to the point I had a nervous breakdown and I would lie on the bed and I would shake. I would just start shaking and he would sit on me and I couldn't understand what was going on. And, I'd hear voices in my head, like echoey voices, and I was really cracking up. And I got so freaked out. I went to a doctor and he said, you're in nervous collapse. He said, how old are you? And of course I lied. I said, I'm 19. And he raised an eyebrow, and he said, well, whatever it is, tell your parents if you need some B vitamins. He prescribed me some Geritol because it had iron B. He says you're malnourished. I'm 6'4" and 145 pounds. You can see my rib cages. I was a 28-inch waist. You know what I mean? We couldn't buy fresh meat, so we'd buy 2 or 3 day old meat from the butcher that he couldn't sell. We lived on liverwurst. Whatever was cheap meat that we could live on, we lived on, and smoked a lot of weed. And I remember How I Met Cherry Vanilla is our manager, Max McGarry, sold weed. And that's a whole other story, How I Met Cherry. But he used to come over and bring weed. And one day he comes over and he goes, I got this really great new stuff. It really gets you high. It's got something in it called angel dust. Now, I know a lot of people going, oh my God. Well, we didn't know. It was just like first hit the market. I smoked this stuff. I was tripping so hard. I couldn't take it. I opened the window. I was on the 5th floor. And I looked down and I remember the street had bent up. And as the cars and the people were walking, they were brushing against my nose and it bent down again. So instead of the street being 5 floors down like this, it was like that. And I said, you know what? I got to get out of here. I need to take a step. And thank God, my sense kicked in and said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Otherwise, I would have walked out that window. I'm here today, thank God, because of that. But what I also remember, and I didn't remember it until I started putting this book together, is we used to go on these little trips. And Bob had friends his age. I'm 14. He had other friends that were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that also happened to have younger, and I'm talking 12, 13, 14-year-old boys as their boyfriends or lovers or neighborhood kids that they fooled around with. And I remember Bob took me to Washington, D.C. We were in a Citroen Maserati because I remember the thing rose and sat down. The guy lived in DuPont Circle, and he was probably like a senator or something. He had a California custom king-size bed, and it was Bob, who was 30. This guy was 50. Me, who was 14, and about 3 or 4 other 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. And it's, hey, it's time to get on, have sex while we take Polaroid pictures and trade these things. And he took me to Philadelphia once, and I freaked out. And I said I was going to run out the door. I didn't want to be part of this. And he said if he did, these people, these aliens were out there and they were going to hunt me down and hurt me. You know, it'd be better for me just to get back in the bedroom and, you know, do with these other boys while they watched and, you know, got off on us doing the things. I went to Amherst, Massachusetts. There was a school teacher who lived up there. He had to pull, don't go near the shades. You know, it was him and like 2 guys, and then Bob and me. And then there was Bob, and I can't remember his last name. He owned a sauna company out in Flushing, Queens, and had a house in Fire Island. And we used to go out to Fire Island. You know, Bob's like, you're going on a trip. I'm like, oh boy, all right, here we go. And we go out to Fire Island, and it would be, like I say, a house full. There would be like 8 or 10 underage boys. Bob, who was like a 50, 60-year-old old man, and my Bob. And we would, you know, run around in our bathing suits or half naked, and they would love it. And then, of course, every night required activities where we're going to have an orgy, but they would sit back and watch, sometimes join in, a lot of Polaroid pictures taken and stuff like that. So I lived with a spaceman who was out of his friggin' mind. So while I was on Fire Island, we used to go dancing at the Monster, which is one of the clubs. There was the Ice Palace in Cherry Grove. Right next to it was called the Meat Rack, where guys used to go and fool around. And I was dancing at the Monster. It was pretty new. And I remember one day I was dancing on the dance floor, and this kind of heavy-set woman, housewife, was dancing. She came over to dance. You want to dance? This is something you did. You asked people to dance. You know, she knew we were gay, and you know, no pickup situation. Just hey, you want to dance? My husband doesn't want to dance. Okay, great. And we're dancing on the dance floor, and I said, "What do you do?" She goes, "I'm an astrologer." And I thought, okay, astrologer. I said, "Oh, you know about the space people?" She goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Oh, Bob talks to the space people." She goes, "How old are you?" And I said, 19. She says, "No, you're not. I have a young son that's your age. You're 14, 13, 14, 15. She says, "Talk to me quickly before he comes over. What is Bob telling you?" I said, "Well, he puts on the radio and he talks to the aliens, and he takes me to parties, you know, in different cities with other guys and their boyfriends." And she said, "How old are their boyfriends?" And I said, "Like my age." And she knew right away that there was something going on. She goes, "Listen, I want you to get away from him tomorrow, disappear, say you're going for a walk, going to the beach." She was in the next community over, Sailor Haven, something like that. She had a boat, and they would live on the boat for a couple of weeks, you know, out at the beach and stuff. And she said, "I want you to come over and tell me everything." And I walked over there, I sat down, I told her the story, and she said, "Listen, your boyfriend, this guy you're living with, is a very sick individual. I want to get you home to your parents." I said, "I don't want to go home to my mother. I have some other stories I'll tell about it. It was very violent. She tried to tie me to a radiator. I mean, crazy, crazy things. I don't want to go home." She says, "Trust me, you're safer there than you are with this guy, because one day he's going to blow up and he's going to hurt you." So she called my mother. You know, of course, my mother had been searching for me and wanted me back. So we arranged several weeks, like a week or two later, when I was home on a Saturday, that my mother was going to come at 11 o'clock in the morning, but I shouldn't tell Bob. And in the meantime, could I pack my things or somehow or another get a bag together? And I realized I had a bag under the bed. I didn't have to pack anything, so I was pretty much incognito, right? So around 10:30, 11 o'clock on that Saturday, he's running around the apartment. We had a bird. We had a beautiful a lorikeet, you know, or was it a lovebird or something? And he was playing music or what? I can't remember what he was doing. Doorbell rings, and I said, "I'll get it." He goes, "Who's that?" I said, I'll get it. And I just buzzed the door. And he goes, what are you doing? Why are you buzzing somebody into the apartment? I said, don't worry, it's okay. Someone's coming to visit me. Who's coming to visit you? Now he suddenly starts freaking out. It could be the cops, or something like that. I said, it's all good. I opened the door. My mother and my father are standing there. And he goes, who's that? And I said, that's my parents. And he, what do you want? And she said, we're taking our son back. You're crazy, and you do crazy things to him, and I'm his guardian now. She goes, you're his guardian? You have the paperwork? Well, I'm going to get the paperwork, and I'm going to adopt him. And I'm listening to this ping pong of a pedophile who's trying to talk my mother down from taking her son back with this, bullshit. Well, she says, go grab your bag. My mother said, go grab your bag. My father and my mother says, go grab your bag. And I go into the bedroom. He takes his fist. He punches it through a hole in the wall, takes the bird, breaks its neck, throws it on the floor, and takes his fist again and smashes it into a giant mirror, and it comes crashing down. My father stepped in. My father was a wimp. He said, if you come within 3 feet of us, I'm going to effing kill you. And I got my bag and I left. And when I left, heading down the stairs, furniture went over. I heard kalaboom, kalaboom. He toppled over everything. But luckily, I got out of that situation. So I had to tell the story of Bob the Spaceman, and I didn't realize until I was researching this book that he was part of a ring of pedophiles. He used to get porn flyers mailed to him in brown paper envelopes, because back in those days, porn was like 8mm things. You'd have a little home projector. There wasn't VHS then, and they would sell you a little reel of a porn thing. And I remember looking at some of them, and there were young boys on those things. So he was part of a network, and pretty heavy stuff, right? So anyway, didn't mean to be a downer, but these are things that happen in my life. I've got I'm trying to do happy stories, and then some of the heavy stories. There's some stuff that happened with my mother. There's the whole Boy George story, my friend dying in his apartment. I had a roommate who died in my arms. It's part of my book. I got to tell it, but I'm trying to pace the good stuff in between the bad stuff, and I'll probably give you a heads up. Thank you so much for listening. I always look at the comments. Thank you for those who love the support. And if you could subscribe. If I reach 1,000, I do this for free. And I had to buy the camera and the lights and all that. I do this for free. If I reach 1,000 subscribers, YouTube starts to pay me. Not very much, a couple of bucks. But then this thing starts to pay for itself. I'm not in this for the money, but we're about 400 subscribers as of recording this. If we could get it up past 1,000, then I can do these and kind of get paid for something for once in my life. Anyway, like it, subscribe if you haven't, even if you don't want to ever look at it again. It just helps the channel. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm still here. Hey, thanks for watching again. When I was a kid, I was in crisis. I had a very bad home situation, and I didn't like going to school. What kid does? But I used to cut school a lot. Either I would go to tell the teacher I was sick, go to the principal's office, my stomach hurts, I've got diarrhea. I started to learn all the good little code words that the teacher was like, no, we got to call your parents and get you home. That started in 4th or 5th grade. And it was chronic. They knew, but they had to call my parents, and my mother had to come and get me. I hated school. I was in junior high school, or middle school, as some people call it, grades 6 through 8. I wasn't very functioning. Like I said, there was crisis at home, so any place that I had to sit still, I was hyperactive. They probably today would have given me Ritalin, right, to chill me out. And I was too smart to be put into a special needs thing. In 5th grade, I was reading on the 9th or 10th grade level. So my test scores were too high for me to be put back, but it was like I was way ahead of the class. The teacher would say something, I knew what the answer was, and I'm like, I'm bored with this. So I stopped. I would cut out of school, take the N train in from Brooklyn to Manhattan, And in Rockefeller Center, if you're from out of the US or New York, it's this incredible Art Deco building that was built by, the Rockefeller. Several buildings actually went over several streets. Gorgeous. I mean, the artwork, the inlays in the ceilings, and it had this 30s, 40s Art Deco kind of thing. And I would sometimes take the N train and get off at 42nd Street. And you ever see those movies or TV shows where that kid, that girl, that guy, gets off and like, oh, wow. Well, that was a lot different from Brooklyn, where I lived, which was semi-detached homes with picket fences, you know what I mean? And everybody had a dog and it was the 70s, It was like you see on a TV thing. And I'd get out and, oh, it was amazing. And of course there was 42nd Street, which they used to call the Deuce. And it was like a blaxploitation movie. There were pimps and junkies and prostitutes and porn theaters and peep shows. But then if you went up a little bit, there was the famous Coca-Cola sign and where they dropped the ball in Times Square, which many people have seen around the world, on television or in pictures. And I'd walk up there and just absorbing this incredible energy. I was supposed to be in school, and we were always told there were truant officers out there, and if they got you, they would drag you back, and boy, were you going to be in trouble. Well, in a city of a couple million people, a kid walking around in 7th, 8th grade, don't think didn't happen to me, and I don't know anybody who happened to, but it was a scare tactic. And I would go up Broadway and walk between the canyons of these buildings, and my mind was like, wow, this is like a whole other world. I want to be part of all this energy. Get up to Rockefeller Center and walk through the building. So in those days, you can get off the subway, go up a couple of blocks above ground, and then I knew on the 6th Avenue line, you could enter around 44th, 45th Street, and from 45th to 53rd Street, you were completely underground, under the street of 6th Avenue. And to me, it was amazing that they dug a hole like this, and, there were shops underneath there, and then you got up into Rockefeller Center, and all of a sudden it got very fancy with granite and these clothing stores, nothing like we saw in Brooklyn. They were fancy shoes, and all the windows had like a little gold trim on it, and it had indirect lighting pin spots. And I thought, wow, this is the epitome of something fancy and luxury, something I've never seen. And I remember walking through Rockefeller Center, and there's a sign, NBC Studios, and there's a girl saying, hey, do you want tickets, anybody free tickets for a TV show that they were filming upstairs? Now, the place where the studio where they filmed Saturday Night Live, before that, they had the Johnny Carson studio, the Saturday Night Live studio, and I think one or two other studios, and they would do the news out of there, but they were doing game shows out of there. And there was 3 on a match and Sale of the Century. Sale of the Century, you would get a car for $10. You would get a whole kitchen thing for $4. One of those sort of things. And I remember going to my first TV show, and I was blown away. I'm sitting in the audience, and this was a big studio. In the distance, there was a set, and this TV show went on, but I was fascinated by all these lights and people with headphones and directors. And although I was blown away by the TV thing, it's all this technology kind of got me really, more excited than what was going on there. And I sat down front, and there was the announcer right over here, and and coming up next, Mrs. Smith is going to win, a whole thing. Stay tuned. He was the announcer. His name was Don Pardo. If you're an American, you may have watched Saturday Night Live, and at the end he'd go, and this is your announcer, Don Pardo. Well, he was kind of like the New York City guy, the announcer that used to announce for NBC at that particular time. I cut school so many times, I'd push my way to the front of the line and sit up front, and he used to turn around and go, hey kid, I see you here again. What'd you do, cut school? And I'm like, no. He goes, all right, you just stay over here. I'll keep an eye on you. Your secret's cool with me. So I got to see a bunch of TV shows. I remember I went over to the Ed Sullivan Theater. It wasn't, there was $10,000 Pyramid or something like that. And I began to know where the TV shows were filming. There was only 2 or 3 spots. And I would cut school and go to those and wander around Manhattan. And for a kid from Brooklyn, it was really, really amazing. And then I discovered museums. I went to the Met on Fifth Avenue, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I walked in, and it was free on certain days, Tuesdays or Thursdays. And I walked in and made a right turn, and they had the Egyptian collection. And it was like, they built a pyramid, and they dismantled the pyramid, put it in a building. And I just remember walking around going, this is incredible. This is so incredible. I want to be a part of this energy. When I left home, I wound up coming into the city because I wanted this to be in my backyard. It was really amazing. I remember the subways. I would stand at the very first train car and cup my hands and watch how the tracks moved and the signals worked, and sometimes you could peek through the door and I'd watch the train operator. So all the technology and all that kind of stuff really amazed me. It's funny, years later, going to Disney, I mean, I like Disney not because of Mickey Mouse, but the technology that it takes to put on these rides and shows. When I go to these things, it's a small world, the little puppets are dancing, but I want to go underneath the stage and the animatronics, what makes those work, and how did they project that talking head that's floating in the middle of the air? So I was always kind of like a little techno kid and stuff like that. And then, of course, I'd get on the subway. I think it was like 15 cents. Maybe I had enough for a pretzel, and then I'd cut my hands over the thing and ride back home to Brooklyn and call it a day. I quit school a lot. I quit school so much in 7th grade that my parents decided to put me to military school, again down in Florida. I agreed to go, and after I went September. By December for Christmas, I couldn't take it. I mean, you had to make your bed, and you had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you had to march. And if you were bad, they'd make you stand in the Florida sun all day in your uniform as punishment. And in Florida, they were allowed to spank kids, and kids were getting paddled, for being kids. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I went home for Christmas vacation, and I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I ran down to my basement. I put a cardboard box over me, and we were supposed to go to the airport, and my parents couldn't find me. And several hours, my father went to work, and then I came back upstairs. My mother, like, your father's gonna kill you, and I can't take it. I don't want to, be in military school, and so on and so on. So by 9th grade, I mentioned in an earlier thing, I got into the high school performing arts fame, and that was such a wonderful school because I was so into it. Finally, something spoke to my brain, and unfortunately, I got kicked out because my behavior from being hyperactive in, primary school and middle school, I carried over to high school, and they weren't going to put up with it, So then I wound up educating myself afterwards. I homeschooled myself. I know I had to get smart. I used to read science. My science was off the chart. My reading was off the chart. My math is terrible, But I wound up picking up science magazines, reading Scientific American. Didn't know what I was reading, but trying to understand, and books and so on and so on. So I wound up self-schooling myself. So there's a little bit of my education history and cutting school and all that. And thanks again for listening. Please subscribe. If you subscribe and we hit 1,000 people, I can get paid for this. Not much, a couple of dollars here and there, but hit the subscribe button if you haven't. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps me get to the point where I do these for free for you. And in turn, I can get paid if we hit a certain... we hit a threshold. Thank you so much for listening. There's season 4. There's going to be heavy stories and light stories, like I mentioned. So this is a lighter one. There'll probably be something pretty heavy tomorrow. I'm trying to balance it and not be like a downer too much. There's still a lot to go. Thanks so much for listening. Bye. Hey, everybody. Okay, well, here's a biggie. My record deal and how I lost out and the details of all that, what happened and why I don't get paid. I signed a record deal with an independent label called Import 12. After about 9 or 10 months of being at the record label, I knew I was getting screwed and I wasn't getting paid, and I more or less walked away from my record deal. That's from my first album, not for Boogie Down Bronx, Hey There Homeboys, Two Sisters. And between 9 and 12 months, or a couple months after, I had no income. So I did one-off records with the same label. A lot of other labels, too. I was on Select Records, which had UTFO and Whistle. I put out that Brown Sugar record. I did a bunch of productions for different artists and stuff like that. But basically, I walked away from my record deal. That's in another story. And there's another story about the guy who ran the record label, wound up getting AIDS and dementia, and I went to his rescue. So when he died, Import 12, Disconet, Sugar Scoop, they made enough money that the guy moved out of a little closet in an office building to literally taking on a whole staff of people, and had his own office, and all that kind of stuff. And the day after Mike Wilkinson died, Stephen Von Blau, who's dead now, and Mark Stiles. And how I know all this is because I became friends with Mark Stiles, and he told me this story. Told me the story of what happened with my masters and how they sold it off. I met Mark one day at a bar, and he says, "Manny Parrish, are you Man Parrish?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Boy, do I have a story to tell you." I said, "Oh." He says, "I used to work for your record label, Import 12 Sugar Soup Disconet." I went, "Oh, yeah, those fuckers." And he said, "Well, I got to tell you." I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, after Mike Wilkinson died, we put the keys in the door and kept the business running, which was illegal because when Michael was the corporation, they weren't even officers of the corporation, but nobody knew that. They picked up the phone, same guy answered the phone, "Where's Mike? He's not here." And they both had pretty bad coke habits. This is what Mark told me directly. And they were selling off masters for money. They were still doing their disconnects, selling a few copies here and there. The licenses were coming in, but not enough to keep people's habits going. And I said, "So what happened to my record?" He said, "Well, we sold it to Unidisc in Canada for $1,000. I said, "How could you sell it to Unidisc?" I said, the record contract was over." He goes, "We printed up a piece of paper that said that you gave up all your rights to all your music." He said, we copied your signature. We saw it on this piece of paper and copied it. And I've seen the signature, and it's not my signature. And there's a lawsuit, which we'll talk about. We went up to Canada, to Toronto. We got $1,000. We gave him all of your masters and told this guy that me, Man Parrish, has given up all rights and all claims, all publishing. It's all his, soup and nuts, owes nothing to me, doesn't owe me money, doesn't have to. I don't have any rights to it. I said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "No." And I said, "What did you do? How much money did you get?" He goes, $1,000. I said, "What did you do with the money?" He said, "We got up there on a Friday night. By Sunday morning, we blew it all on coke and partying." And do you know what that made me feel like? Do you have any idea what it made me feel like? So I'm getting upset now. I said, "Well, I got to go to a lawyer." And, we became friends. And I went to one or two lawyers, and I was like, give me $10,000, give me $5,000. And I was like, "Oh, I don't have that kind of money." Go ahead forward about 5 or 7 years. I did a party at the Cock Bar, which I'll talk about. But one of the DJs, Gant Johnson, really wonderful guy, had a party one of the other nights. He came in on my Sunday night, and he said, "Oh, man, congratulations, you're in Grand Theft Auto." I said, "The video game?" He says, yeah. You get in the car, you turn on the record, the radio, and you're playing the video game, and hip-hop bebop's coming out of the radio. And I went, "I didn't license that." I was so poor, I had to borrow the money to buy a PlayStation and borrow money to buy the game. It was like $300 for the PlayStation, another $50. I put the thing in, I'm playing the game, I get in the car, I turn the radio, my music's there, and wait a minute, I never signed a licensing deal. I mean, those are $40,000, $50,000 advances. Where's my money? So Gant told me he has a lawyer, Brett Green, that did some stuff for him. And Brett's been wonderful in my life. He's worked for next to nothing many times, knew I didn't have a lot of money to pay. And thank you so much, Brett. You're an angel. Really, if you're watching this. He said there's a place called Artist Rights, and they're kind of a nonprofit organization, and they find people that got screwed over from record labels, and I'm going to make an introduction. You go over, tell them the story, which I did. And they decided to do a lawsuit, and we went to court. And this is many years now after I first figured out what's going on, but I was in my legal... You have 6 years to figure out... If you put out a record, you're Michael Jackson, and I steal your record, you only have 6 years to chase after me to sue me. After 6 years, you're out of luck. Can you believe... This is the law, okay? This is the law. Because you're past your statute of limitations from the moment you discover that someone's screwing you over till the time you can take them to court. You have a 6-year window, which is shameful. I'm battling right now, just to put that on hold, after 35 years, my rights come back to me, but I only have a 2-year window to claim it. If I don't claim that, I think I have 3 or 4 years after that, the rights go back to these people that stole my music. So anyway, I'm reclaiming my music now. And we're at the, that's all been done legally and all that kind of stuff. But, so they started a lawsuit, and Unidisc kept me out of court because I said to my lawyer, why are they protecting a record that I thought is only spending, selling a couple of thousand copies? They spent $40,000, $50,000 in legal fees. And my lawyer said, obviously, they're protecting something. So we did some discovery, and they sold lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of records over the years. My record deal was a recording contract. And when you send stuff to movies, I'm in Shaun of the Dead. I didn't license that. I'm in Grand Theft Auto. I didn't license Hip Hop Bebop to Grand Theft Auto. So how did it get there? They were taking this $1,000 and they were jading tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff. They're selling it to compilation companies across the world. I'm on Japanese labels, and I'm on Mexican labels and French labels, Hip Hop Bebop, and they would collect advance money and get royalties. And the guy's sitting there driving a Jaguar, living in a beautiful big house, and I'm on welfare. I'm not the only person he did it to, by the way. There's been a lot of lawsuits. I remember allegedly he claimed that he had like Donna Summer's catalog or the Bee Gees or something, and Universal went after him. Back in those days, you could do that kind of stuff because we didn't have free trade between America and Canada. And most of the people that he went after or claimed that it was his or bought, you couldn't cross the border and sue them. You'd have to go over to Canada and hire a Canadian lawyer and take up residence, while a whole lawsuit went on. And most people didn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to chase after all this kind of stuff. So Unidisc kept me out of court. That was the only way they could do it, because if I sat down in front of a judge or a jury and I said, I never received a penny, part of my contract is I give you music, you give me money. May not be a lot of money, but somewhere along the line, you have to give me a report that says this is what we've earned, this is what we spent, and this is what's left over after we take our cut. Here's your share. That never happened. They have me as work for hire in their contract, but you can't hire somebody and not pay them. So there was never an advance. There's never any cash checks, all that kind of stuff. So Unidisc used... my friend Michael Odetsky is the guy who died in Boy George's apartment. We're going to talk about that in Boy George's house. He was my writing partner and my very close friend. A lot of shady shit went on there. We'll definitely talk about that. And that fucking pig, George. But we'll talk about that. I'm angry. Michael Odetsky went up to a lawyer called Michael Pantaleone, and he needed something done for a contract somewhere. And I'm sitting next to Michael, and Pantaleone's across the desk. And Michael happened to say, why don't you ask Michael, how did you get in Grand Theft Auto? And I was like, well, I can't afford to hire this guy. He's a big-end lawyer. And he said, oh, ask him. And I said, well, Michael, if you can find something out, let me know. Now, I didn't hire Michael Pantaleone. I never signed a contract. I never gave him a deposit for work. It was just, hey, find something out, let me know. Unidisc, because Michael Pantaleone is friends with Unidisc's lawyers. He goes, oh, I know Man Parrish. He came by the office many years ago. They said, was it longer than 6 years ago? Yes, it was. Oh, did he ask you to help him? Yes, he did. So he was your client? Yeah, should I say yes? So Michael Pantaleone said that I was his client. Where's my receipt? I never paid you. And since I was his client, I was out of the 6-year window, so I couldn't sue them in court. And Michael Leone even got some woman who I don't even know to vouch that I was in the office, and it was just me, Michael Radetsky, and Michael Pantaleone. I don't know who this woman was. I heard her name in the courtroom, and she vouched for the, she's sticking up with her lawyer friend, and this is a lawyer, and lawyers, only tell the truth. So they kept me out of court. So we appealed, and we went all the way up to the state Supreme Court. Because, like I said, if they kept me out of court, I mean, if I got into court in front of a judge, in front of a jury, it would be, okay, you got my music. Yes, we do. Did you pay me? Well, I think so. All right, where's the checks? We don't have them. Okay, did you give Manny in advance? I think so. Okay, where's the receipt for that? Did you report to him every 30, 60, 90 days like you're supposed to in your contract and give him a statement, and then an inventory, how many units were sold, how much was taken out, and what his share? Well, they couldn't obviously produce any of this evidence, making the contract invalid. Like, once again, I said, if I hire you to work, I have to pay you, right? And this is what they were claiming. If I don't pay you, there's no contract there. And that was the basis of our lawsuit. And so they had to keep me out of court. We went all the way up to the state Supreme Court, and they argued it again in the state Supreme Court, saying the lower court already dismissed this. I don't even know why we're here. And there was New York State Supreme Court. I think there were 6 or 8 judges. Most of them were older, and they kind of didn't want to be bothered. They didn't understand what was going on with music, so they dismissed it. One guy, he was a Spanish guy in his 40s or 50s, and after it was whatever it is, 5-1 or 7-1. He's the only guy who voted with him. And when they said, okay, dismissed, everybody can go home, he actually said into the microphone, he said, I didn't hear him. And all of a sudden, everybody looked at me and said, what did he say? He goes, Mr. Parrish, I just want to let you know, I'm a big fan of your music, and I think this court treated you unfairly. I'm sorry you had to go through this. And I got up and I walked out, and I thought, oh my God. So, and then their lawyer was a brother team, and one of them died of fucking heart attack or cancer, which I think, good, you got your fucking karma for screwing me over. I'm not supposed to curse on the channel because it affects if you can make money on it, and I'm not making any money on this channel, by the way. I'm doing this all for free for you guys, telling my story. But that's the story about kind of how I got screwed out of my money and my record contract. I walked away for it in 1984. And in, 1989, 1987 or something like that, it was sold for coke money to Unidisc, and for years, they licensed my stuff. They bought a crap contract. They bought a bad, bogus deal. They tried to dupe me, but they got duped. They bought a piece of paper that wasn't valid, but we couldn't get it into court. And of course, by law, once this is decided on that it's done, I can't go back and sue them. So people always say, get a lawyer, go in and do something. I can't. Now, the only thing I can do, it's been 35 years, and I'm reclaiming my copyright. It's mine. It was never theirs to start off with. I'm kept out of court from suing them for that particular thing. I actually have another angle because I have a trademark on my name, and I can always go after them for that. But that's the story behind Hip Hop Bebop, and why didn't I get a lawyer? A lot of people ask, and so on and so on and so on. In 2 years, everything will be mine again. They've made a shitload of money. They've sold 5 million records on their own, and they've got advances from the Shaun of the Dead movie, $10, $20, $30,000. They probably got $5, $10, $20,000 from Rockstar Games for Grand Theft Auto. We're discovering licenses. It was licensed into some sort of FX series, and a lot of you guys told me it was some story about some dude in the street, and there was a heroin or a coke deal going down. Hip Hop Bebop was playing in the background. You know, and then Unidisc had the balls. Now, I can't claim my rights, but I could tell the story, and I'm telling the fucking story on what this company did to me, you know, to the company. You screwed me, I'm going to dirty your name, because this is what happened. So, I'm angry. I'm really pissed. They took a huge chunk of my 35 years of my life they took away from me. I'm so pissed I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, that's why when people say, why don't you get a lawyer and go to get a lawyer? It's been decided that I can't, but I'm reclaiming my rights to my track after 35 years, and I'm telling my story, you know, to them. So that's it, folks. Welcome to the music business. It's not a lot of fun at times. I want to say something, which I'm going to put in the very last chapter. We're on episode 43, season 4, episode 3 or 4. I got to look, and I'm going to stop at episode 10, which would make it the 50. This is not a story about, you know, who I slept with and how many fabulous people in Studio 54, which I will put in those, you know, that is part of it. This is more of a story about survival, about somebody who's gone through a lot of crazy stuff. When I sat down and I thought about doing this book, and this is my book, I thought, wow, there's a lot of crazy shit here, right? I mean, a lot of crazy stuff. I'm still standing. I'm a little broken, a little neurotic from it, but I'm not a junkie. I'm not a straitjacket. I'm not dead. I'm functioning. I'm doing music, and I'm that Energizer Bunny. I just keep on going, I guess. So based on that, thank you. Thank you for watching, and I'm telling it all. Have a good night or day. Well, the only way I could do this today is to shut these guys up. Ow! That's... Buddy's the white one. Monkey's the dark one. Say hello, you're on YouTube. Oh? What? What? Who's there? Who's there? Well, we use Dorkbox and Hip Hop Bebop, but not in Boogie Down Bronx, and that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, I'm going to put you guys down. I'm sure you're going to start barking about something. Love you. There we go. That usually shuts them up, so I could do one of these videos. Shh, I'm doing a video. Yeah. I think there might be a little bit of that. Come here, baby. Anyway, Boogie Down Bronx, how was it made? Big question people always ask. Let me pick up a dog and shut him up. How was Boogie Down Bronx made? Well, it was after my record deal, right? And, it was 6, 7, 8 months later. I was poor. I didn't have any money, and I kind of reverted back to the record company who screwed me to do a one-off record deal. And I figured, look, if I do, my record contract was over, but I thought if I do a one-off deal and he'd have to pay me some advance money to do it, I'd have enough to pay the rent that month. Not as a work for hire, just as an advance on record sales. Was not connected to my original recording contract. So, I was still friends with Raul because he wasn't the guy that screwed me. Mike Wilkinson was from the record label. And I called up Raul. Raul says, come on, buddy, let's do a record. And I'm like, I need the money. All right, let's do a record. We'll figure out a way to make this work. So, I had started a couple of, tracks. This was done in my Brooklyn bedroom, right? The bedroom in Brooklyn. I had lost my loft and I had to move back to my father's house because I had no money. I was on welfare. I was on food stamps. I couldn't support myself. And at 24 years old, I had to move home and live with my daddy. My mom had already passed away There's a story about that with Studio 54, Madonna. I went from the cemetery to playing Studio 54, blah, blah, blah. So, working on some beats, keeping myself busy, try not to be depressed, just music is my life, so I got to keep doing it kind of thing. And Raul said, I'll take the N train out and come out to Brooklyn and we'll see what's up. In the meantime, there was this really great guy, John Carter, which in a Freeze Force. And he lived around the corner. And sometimes he would sit on my steps. And I'd come home and he'd be doing a rhyme, throwing at me. And I go, yeah, peace, bro, what's up, and all that kind of stuff. Raul came over, and John Carter happened to be sitting on the steps. And I didn't know, but Raul was hanging out with him on the steps, listening to him rhyme. And we came upstairs, and we're kind of working on this track. And Raul said, what about that kid downstairs? Why don't we get him to rhyme? I said, wow, I didn't even think of that. Sure, let's talk to him. Bring him up and say, hey, John, what's going on? You rhyme. He goes, yeah. We'll split everything up evenly. Okay, great. Record company didn't do that, by the way. I don't even know if they have him as a writer on Boogie Down Bronx. They didn't. You're supposed to register works, and they did stuff on my behalf without even asking me. I got to check and see if John's a writer on that. Even if he is, Unidisc stole it. So, poor John, he suffered a lot afterwards. In fact, John was so emotionally messed up from Boogie Down Bronx not getting paid and how they screwed him. He literally lost his voice for like a year or something like that. I mean, he couldn't talk. I think it was a psychological thing. John, if you're listening, we all got screwed in this. Anyway, John came up, we opened up a microphone, and maybe in 1 or 2 takes, he laid down Boogie Down Bronx, my Man Parrish and Cool Raul, cooler than the water in the swimming pool. And I remember, wow, this is so cool. And he split, and we finished the track, and it was pressed onto vinyl and put out there. And, took a while to get out there, but you guys know it. So the geeks, the recording dudes, the synthesizer people listening, some of the tech people and curiosity seekers, what did I use? Well, I had an Emulator 1. It was the first sampler that was available. And what a sampler is, if you don't know, it takes an audio recording. In this case, 2 seconds was the maximum because it had to fill up memory. We didn't have computers. This was very early technology. It would take a 2-second sample at, it was 8-bit. It was about the quality, a little bit better than a telephone conversation. Now we have high fidelity, ultra high definition sound. We can sample and all that kind of stuff. But back then, it was maybe the bandwidth a little bit more than a good telephone call. And it had 5-inch floppy disks, big. When discs were literally floppy, when you would hold them and they would flop around, that's what we call floppy disk. Put it in a drive, and to load that 2 seconds of memory, it probably took 30 seconds on the drive. And this thing was made out of steel. It was 66 keys or something like that, and it was in a steel case. It weighed as much as like a piano, just massive. And I think I had my first computer then. Well, I had an Apple IIc computer back when I did, in my loft when I did hip-hop bebop, but I didn't use it for music. It wasn't possible then. And then I upgraded my Apple IIc to a 512 Mac Plus. And OS 7, black and white screen. Screen was this big, and there was a company called Opcode, and they made a sequencer, and I used that sequencer. There was a little port on the back, a little adapter, and it went to a splitter box. And did I use MIDI on that? I don't think I used MIDI on Boogie Down Bronx. I don't think I did because MIDI wasn't that stable. But I was able to use the computer let's see, was Boogie Down? No, I didn't have my computer during Boogie Down Bronx. That was all done manually. So I had an 8-track tape recorder. One track had, drums. The other one had bass. And then on the other track, keyboard parts, John's vocal, which left 4 of the tracks open. The emulator has all those, wow, and all the, funny little, crazy sound effects and stuff like that. That makes 6 tracks. The 7th track was the vocoder, Boogie Down Bronx, Boogie Down, Boogie, 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 Boogie Down Bronx. And I think track 8 was percussion. And that was the whole record. Since I wasn't working with the record company really, and I didn't want to get involved, we didn't take that machine and pull it into a studio and bounce it up to 24 tracks. So Boogie Down Bronx is an 8-track, only 8 individual tracks on that record, and it did so well. Another record that did really well for music history buffs was Flying Lizard's Money. That was done on a 4-track in a garage. Boogie Down Bronx was done on an 8-track in my bedroom. And then we mixed it. I think we rented a digital reverb, one of the very first ones. We used to rent from a place called the Toy Specialist, I think it was, the Toy Specialist. They're on 48th Street and Broadway. And if you rented on Friday, they were closed Saturday and Sunday, so they'd only charge you one day to rent Friday and return on Monday. So we would rent effects boxes, $100,000 synthesizers, like when we did Alicia's Baby Talk, we rented a Fairlight, we'd rent it on Friday. They'd come with a pickup truck, and this thing weighed like 100 pounds in 3 different cases, and they'd bring it up the stairs to my second floor and make like a delivery, like a UPS delivery, right? It was amazing. And we mixed that on my Tascam 8-track mixer and plugged the reverb. I used the spring reverb, and the other reverb or delay, which we rented, would have been plugged into one of the Sens. Very small setup. Keyboards and stuff. I used the 808 Roland drum machine, programmable drum machine. I used the Prophet 1 for bass line, my Prophet 5 for keyboard parts. All the sampling, that was the first use of sampling on my emulator 1, and was played by hand because we weren't able to sync MIDI. I don't think the emulator 1 had MIDI. It was just a played keyboard, which, by the way, I used to rent out in New York City because no one had a sampler. And I got a call that Herbie Hancock, Rocket, was going to be on NBC News or something. You can Google it. He talks about sampling, and that's my emulator one there that he's playing. If I could find it, I'll link it at the end of this video. And he used it on the air, and then they didn't pack it up, or the stagehands didn't pack it up right, and it got back to me broken. And it didn't get fixed, let's put it that way. It wasn't Herbie Hancock's fault, you know what I mean? It was whoever was doing the transporting and handling it and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think what else. Keyboard. I had a Casio CZ101, which we used to call a Cheesy 101. One of those little Casio keyboards. Pop, boop, boop, pop. Keyboards and stuff like that. That was used. I think I had a Korg Poly 6 and a Korg String Lambda string machine, because there was the only things you could play polyphonically. I already got rid of my big giant Moog synth modules, and trying to think what else. My Oberheim little module, but it was a very basic track put together. And there's one thing that's really incredible. Now I could do 256 tracks if I want, right? On a computer. It's there. It's all digital. It's pristine quality. But one of the great things about being limited to 8 tracks of music is I had to learn arrangement, because you couldn't just throw everything on there at once. There was no dynamics. So we had to make some really big decisions. Do I want this bass line or that bass line? Do I want to have this keyboard and this keyboard and this keyboard and this keyboard and this? No, I can't. I didn't have amount of tracks. So a lot of that stuff was kind of simple, which made the listener's ear catch on to it a lot easier, because it wasn't that complex musically. There's only 8 parts running for your ears to listen to, as opposed to 24 or 48 or 96 or 128 tracks hitting your brain at once. As a listener, you don't know that, but as a producer, I have to be aware of how many tracks of guitars and strings and drums and stuff. This was all done basically in 8 mono tracks. I remember the drums were laid down. We had to mix the drums before we recorded it. Was the kick loud enough? Was the snare and the kick balanced? Oh, the hi-hats disappeared. Bring that up. Oh, wait, the kick and the snare are too loud. Bring everything down, then introduce something else. So things, you had to think about what you were composing and pre-mix it. It was great. That little studio in Brooklyn saw Boy George. The Village people came out, did the man-to-man stuff there. I did my stuff. Started the Two Sisters, which I did. IRT closed Watch the Closing Doors. COD, which was me and Raul. We wanted to get paid COD, cash on delivery, and we did a remake of Gil Scott-Heron's In the Bottle using mostly that equipment. You know, we couldn't afford to go into bigger studios. On occasion, we did. The Alicia stuff that we would start on the Fairlight, me and Michael Rudetsky, in my house, because the thing would come at like 9 or 10 o'clock Friday, and we would work all day Friday, stay up all day Saturday, you know, sleep for a couple of hours Sunday, and then Sunday night, or Monday, they would come and they would take it back, and then we would re-rent it during the week to go to Vanguard Studios, which is another story I got to tell about, and then print the Alicia stuff onto 24-track tape with Mark Berry and stuff like that. Vanguard Studios, which we'll talk about in another thing, was kind of like there's a famous studio, Muscle Shoals, who many people know about, which is kind of like where Aretha Franklin and a lot of soul came out of. It was the spot in the South for that music. Well, there was a studio in New York called Vanguard Studios where Planet Rock, me, Man Parrish, Freeze Force IOU, Shannon, Alicia, probably Madonna stuff. Early Madonna was mixed there. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, so for you guys that are always asking about that record, it was done on an 8-track half-inch with very little equipment. I didn't use my computer because there was no MIDI. I don't even think the Prophet had MIDI at that time. No, I don't think it did. So that was all hand stitched together. All right, guys. So you wanted to know how Boogie Down Bronx was made, because a lot of you people like it. And done in my bedroom, minimal equipment, only 8 tracks of audio. We had to, and we didn't layer stuff. Like half a track wasn't a bass, and then the other half of the track was a guitar or whatever sounds we used. I mean, we were just 8 individual parts, cleverly put together, mixed, edited with a razor blade, and then sent to the record company. And I don't even know what the advance, I think I got $500 or something like that. And of course I never get paid on it. Hey, welcome to the music business. If you're out there, I want to say something. If you're in the music business, it's great to be a musician and all that kind of stuff, but it's critical that you learn the business side of music. Music is not just art and making records and putting it out there and being fabulous. There is the music business. If you don't know about the music business, either you get a manager or somebody that you trust. And I was managed by David Bowie's manager, the biggest ones out there, and I got screwed. So you need to know about the music business. There's a great book called This Business of Music, and you could probably find it on Amazon or wherever digital books are downloaded. It shows you sample contracts. It shows you should be getting between this amount and this amount of money. It talks about music publishing, what that means, mechanicals. I had to learn because I got tired of getting fucked. All right, there we go. I want to put that in there. I'm going to go kiss my puppies, and thanks again so much. Really, if you could like this and subscribe, if we hit 1,000 subscribers, then YouTube will pay me probably $1. But I'm doing this for free. Here's my book. Love you guys. Thank you so much. And the comments and the supports, really, thank you. Hi guys, this is Man Parrish, and I just wanted to give you a heads up what's going on. I know a lot of people have always told me I should take my stories that I tell, the ones that I post online, and everybody says, oh, these are great, you should do a book. Well, I tried doing a book. It's been 3 years of trying to put this together, and I've had 3 different writers, an agent, stuff went to publishers. Oh, your story is great. It's not what we want right now. The typical BS, right? So what I've decided to do is I'm going to tell my stories to you on camera through YouTube. I'm starting my own YouTube channel specifically for these stories, which is different than my regular YouTube channel, which has nothing on it. So if you go there, there's nothing there. But this is going to be Man Parrish Stories channel. And it's just me talking to you directly about these great stories that everybody keeps telling me they want to hear more and more of. So instead of doing the book, I'm going to be delivering it to you hopefully little 5-minute segments, and it's going to be unfiltered. There's nobody editing it, nobody telling me I can't talk about this or that because the world can't deal with a story about something wild that went on or something. All right. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. The channel isn't ready yet. This is just a teaser to get it going. It'd be great if you put some comments and give me some feedback. But hope I look pretty. And see you guys soon. This is a video I've been putting off for a very long time, and I've been dreading doing it. This is a video about my mom and how it affected my life for many, 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 many years. She was schizophrenic, and some bad things happened, and I carried them with me for years. And I want to let's start with the beginning stuff. My mom didn't. I'm adopted. My mom wasn't able to have kids, and my parents had me very late in life. I think they were like 45 years old, and they adopted me. They couldn't. They went through normal adoption agencies, but they were too old. They were giving kids to younger couples. And my mother decided to go the black market route. And what that means is they paid for me. Remember, my mom had told me once that it cost $4,500 to pay for me, the fee, to this woman who was in trouble. And my father was pissed off because we could buy a brand new Cadillac car for that price back in 1958. So my mother had it arranged that the woman who gave birth to me would check into the hospital under my adopted mother's name. Back then, they didn't ask you for ID when you went to the hospital. And the woman checked into the hospital, Mrs. Parrish, that's my real last name, and had me. I had a staph infection. I was in there for 10 days, and finally I got to come out. I remember bits and pieces from my childhood. We had a very 60s home. We had a Plymouth with the fins on the back, a 1962 or 64 Plymouth. In 1964 and 1965, we had a checker marathon. If you ever saw New York City, those big round bubble cabs, we had that. We went to the World's Fair in 1964 and 65, and we sat on the Van Wyck Expressway in the middle of the summertime with our windows rolled up while everybody's windows rolled down, and they thought we were crazy. We were one of the first cars to have air conditioning. And I was so small, I was able to lie across the back on the floor with my adopted sister, who was 4 years younger than me. My mother would put down a blanket, and by the end of the day, we were exhausted, and we would sleep for the ride home. I think before my sister came, I had my first birthday, and my mom invited all of her girlfriends over, and she set up a table for me in the other room, and I sat in the other room by myself. I remember I was all dressed up, sitting in a high chair. And there's some video of it somewhere. In that video, 8mm thing. And that was the beginning of stuff was weird between my mother and how she thought of me. And I remember everybody was having a party in the other room, and I was just sitting there in a high chair all by myself while they ate cake, and I could see it through the doorway, but I wasn't allowed to be part of the party. My mother was, I don't know, kind of weird. We thought, kind of just different, neurotic, strange. But that was just the beginnings of schizophrenia, which turned into Alzheimer's, which she died of. Lots of crazy things happened. My father would leave for work at 8 in the morning, come back 6 at night, and I'd come home from school, and it was some of the most fearful points of my life. My mother got very violent as things went on. She was on some sort of rampage about something that I did or supposedly did, and she got a hold of me in a chokehold, and she dragged me to a radiator. A lot of this stuff is going to be hard to hear, so if you guys are sensitive to this stuff, you might want to hang up. And I fought her, and she struggled to tie me to a radiator. She was going to turn up the steam and burn me and teach me a lesson that I should be a good boy, whatever that was in our head. I remember one time when my sister was around, so I must have been 5 or 6. My sister was in her crib, and my mother came after me for something. I was always doing something wrong, I didn't close the door tight enough, I didn't push the chair in far enough, I sneezed at the wrong time, and she came after me with a broomstick, and I got under my sister's crib, and I pulled the bars down, and she was sticking the broom, hurting me really bad with the broom, and I had a little stuffed monkey that I used to hold on to, and she grabbed it and pulled it away from me, and she says, "Now I'm going to kill your monkey." And she took a pair of scissors, and she stabbed it, and I was screaming, "Don't kill my little stuffed monkey." It was the only thing that I had. And she said, "I'm going to cut its tail off to teach you, you weren't a good boy or whatever you didn't do." And this was her mental illness. But as a child, I didn't understand this kind of stuff, right? She would come into my bedroom, and she would tell me, 1 o'clock in the morning, the light would come on my bedroom. "Manny, are you asleep?" I go, "No." "Why? What's wrong?" "Get out of my house if you're not asleep." Well, she woke me up. I said, "But you woke me up." "I don't care. You're awake." It's snowing outside. I used to sleep in my underwear. Just my shorts, nothing else. And she'd pull me out of bed by my ear, and I'd scream and yell, and my father just couldn't deal with what's going on. He just put blinders on or completely ignored it. My mother dragged me down a flight of stairs and threw me out in the snow. And as a young kid, that was pretty frightening because I thought I was really out on the street and I didn't know where to go. And I started screaming and yelling, and I think I still have the scar here. I have a scar here somewhere where I punched my hand. I punched my hand through the glass, and I shredded my head. And I wanted to come back in the house. I didn't know what I did wrong, and there was a kind, sweet lady across the street that heard all the yelling and screaming, came by with a blanket and put it around me and brought me to her house, and thank God for her. She went across, talked to my parents, and I got to come back, and I was always living in fear that these crazy things would happen. She threw me out several times over several months, and the neighbors were aware of it. And unlike today, where you call child custody and all that kind of stuff, we were just a crazy family on the block, which was shame. My mother was mentally ill and needed to be treated, and there was nobody who could diagnose her because you wouldn't go to a doctor. It was something shameful, It was an incredible amount of stress as a kid. And then when I was about 10 or 11 years old or 12 years old, I'd sit at the kitchen table, and my mother came up behind me, and we're eating. And she was over grabbing some food and put the pan down, came up behind me and punched me in the back of the head. And I was like, "What?" At a certain point, you get broken down and you just sit there and you kind of like, "What?" And she said, "You're picking holes in the bathroom tiles." I'm like, what are you talking about? No, please, because I know I was going to be hurt. And she'd grab me by the ear and drag me into the bathroom. She says, you take my bobby pins and you cut holes in the tiles and you fill them in with black eyebrow pencil to let me know that you're getting back at me for hitting you. Maybe in some way in her mental illness, she knew it was wrong that she was hitting me, and I don't know. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, look, you see right over here? Bam! She hit my head into the tiles, and I'm bleeding, and I just collapsed between the tiles and the toilet, and she just walked back off into the kitchen, and I'm in tears. My father's just sitting there watching TV, not knowing what to do. My little sister wasn't aware. She was 2, 3, 4 years old, 5 years old. And I went to my room, and I just cried. And the next day I went to go to dinner, and she made an announcement. I'm not cooking for you anymore. You're an animal. You're not going to eat with the family. And I went, what did I do? That's the rules, and that's what it is. And then for about a year or two, I had to learn how to cook. I had to wait for the family to eat dinner and the dishes to be washed, and not only leave the room, but the kitchen light was shut off. And then I was allowed to come in and make food for myself. I lived on eggs, bologna, toast, whatever. I think I made like pudding one day, or rice pudding or something. And I was allowed to have access to a lot of the stuff was in cans. I would just heat up some green beans. That went on for a long time. Then my mom started deteriorating even more, and the house became a mess. If you ever see the Hoarders TV shows or a movie like Grey Gardens, it wasn't dirty, there wasn't garbage, but there were piles of newspapers on the table, or laundry would be washed and put on a chair, and then that chair was full, so the next batch of laundry would be on a coffee table, and then that would spill over to a couch, and, piles of newspapers. And I would go to school, and I couldn't concentrate. I was hyperactive and crazy and all over the place. And at the end of school, my friend Victor Alonso, I started going to his house, and I wouldn't go home until my father came home, because I was frightened that my mother was going to do something to me. I was in 6th, 7th grade. And for a couple of weeks, I wouldn't come home. And then one day my mother stood outside the school, and I came down the steps, and she was there, and I ran, and she went running after me. She had a pipe in her hand. You better come home, and all that kind of stuff. And the kids were laughing at me. I couldn't bring friends into the house. I didn't have friends because friends hung out at friends' houses. You didn't have internet. You didn't have Twitter. You didn't have all this stuff. So you had to be face to face with all your friends. And whose house are we going to hang out? Your house, my house? Well, it was always their house. And my friends were like, well, how come I can't hang out at your house? So you're weird. Okay, fuck you. See you later. And, one day my mother came after me. I was 13, 14 years old. And my father just sat there. And my mother was ironing. And my father was playing piano. And my mother decided to walk around the ironing board and come after me for something. I don't remember what. And I shoved her so hard and she fell. And I said, you can go fuck yourself. And my father one time got up and told me, "Did you ever talk to your mother like that?" And he's grabbing me, and I picked up the iron and I put it right next to his head, and I said, "You fucking pussy, you've allowed this to go on for way too long. If you fucking touch me, this iron's going to go right in your head." I dropped it, and everybody scattered. The next day, I came home from school. My mother started in with me, and I told her to go fuck herself again, and she hit me so hard, she knocked me unconscious. And we used to use the side entrance to get into the house. It's like an Archie Bunker kind of house, Brooklyn semi-detached. There wasn't much room between the refrigerator, the walls on either side, and I had fallen down, blocked the door. I was unconscious. My father went to go open the door, and my body was on the floor. And And he pushed the door open, and he said to my mother, "What happened?" And she said, "I've had it with him. I'm going to kill him. Blah, blah, blah." And for the first time ever, my father took my mother and slapped her. Her glasses broke and went flying. And it was her house, not my father's. Her mother had left it to her. And she told him and me and my sister to get out. And we went to a hotel, and we lived there for 3 weeks. And it's so dysfunctional and so painful. And then I left home at 14, and that's why I left home, because it was so bad. And what it was like for a kid to grow up that didn't, now I understand a lot of it, but to grow up and experience that for years and have shame and not be able to talk to anybody about it. My mother would drag me to psychiatrists saying, he's crazy. And I would tell them these stories, and then they would pull my mother in and say, "Look, you're the problem. You're crazy. We want to bring you into therapy." And she would open the door screaming, "You're all crazy," and grab me and pull me down the hallway. "Let's go to some other doctor because you're crazy, not them." And it scarred me for a very long time. Gave me panic attacks. Made me very dysfunctional in relationships and love and being close to people for a long time. I know people had bad lives, and a lot of people's lives worse than me, but it affected my ability to just be normal. And I wanted so much to just be like everybody else. I'm glad I was different because I did music, but I just didn't want all the pain that came with that, all that craziness. So it was terrible stress for a young kid. I don't want to upset people with this, but this is just something I was going to put in my book and something I had to tell. And this is my book, my video book, and I'm letting it out. You're very lucky if you have parents. That was the other thing, is I remember I used to say, "Why am I adopted?" And I know if I was with my real parents, this wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't treat me like this. And I used to lie in bed and just dream of what my real mother was like, and how happy I would have been. When you have parents, you have a genetic bond with them, no matter how screwed up they are. You always know your mommy is there. You go and hug them. There's a genetic bond. When you're adopted, you have parents that tell you they love you and all that kind of stuff. But when it goes off the rails, it's like living with an aunt or an evil stepsister. They're not your parents. And when you're in crisis and you want to have a hug, and we didn't touch, we didn't hug, we didn't kiss, we didn't say "I love you." And when you're in crisis and you just want to be protected and hold somebody, it's not there. So be lucky if you have parents. Be lucky if you have family, no matter how screwed up they are. My adopted sister, my mother never bothered her. And my sister knew about all this. She's gone now. She's passed away. She didn't tell me until the very end that she didn't know how to deal with it. But my sister was free of all this. I was the firstborn, and I was expected to be perfect, I guess, in her mental illness. She wound up getting Alzheimer's. And I was living in the city. That was the Studio 54 hip-hop, bebop thing. I lost my record deal, David Bowie's manager, my loft, and my father called me all like within a day or two and told me my mother had died. I played Studio 54 that night. And I had a loft, and I was just in there for a week. I didn't answer the door. I was dressed in a pair of pajamas holding a teddy bear, and my friends broke down the door because they thought I was dead inside. I moved home to Brooklyn, and I took care of my father I gave up my music because I hadn't been paid. And I lived upstairs with my dad and watched him get old until he died, and I took care of him till the very end. The last 2 years of his life, he moved down to Florida to be closer to my sister because I had been there for 25 years, and I couldn't leave the house without getting panicked that my father was going to die. My mother was gone. Anyway, I suffered panic attacks and a lot of shit, but it feels really good to get this out. People close to me know the story. People very close to me know the story. Friends know bits and pieces of it. Be lucky for what you have. If you've had a happy and a good life, be really lucky. If you've had a bad life, you may know what I'm talking about, and be strong. These whole video series, this is about survival. I had all these fabulous things happen, these horrible things, but I'm still standing, right? I'm not a junkie. I'm not in a straitjacket. I'm a little botched in the brain from it, but I'm still here in one piece. That's the mom story that I've been dreading to talk about for a very long time. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. I have a couple of good stories, and I got a doozy Boy George story. And we're coming to the end of this video series. A couple of more things, and I'll figure out something else to do live, or maybe some studio stuff. But thank you. Well, gather around the fireplace, children. Grandpa's going to tell you a story about the village people. A lot of people know that I spent 6 years on the road helping manage the village people. Well, let's rewind and go through that story. The village people, not all of them were gay, okay? Let's get that out of the way. At the height of their career, many of them were getting royalties. They were hired as actors to put on costumes, and when they complained that they weren't making enough money, their manager, who made like $100 million, French manager, told them, "You're replaceable. We'll get somebody else to fill your costume. You know, you're a boy band, so to speak, and that's it. See you later." And a lot of them walked. That's why there were a lot of different faces in Village People. Then, I guess it was the late 80s or something, early 90s, late 80s. Randy Jones, the cowboy from the Village People, called me and said, "Hey, would you produce a record for us?" And I was like, Village People, like, yeah, haha. Hung up the phone. And he called back several times, was kind of persistent, and I thought, okay, they were playing at Spectrum's in Brooklyn, which is where it used to be 2001 Odyssey, where they filmed Saturday Night Fever, and I happened to know the owner. It was in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. I said, okay, let me go down and see what these guys are all about. And I was like, yeah, ready to laugh at them. And these guys got up on stage, and I heard these voices that were like, you know, they're not lip-syncing, they're really singing this stuff. Wow. So I said, sure, let's do this. We did a track, and then Randy called me back a couple of weeks later and said, "Do you know anybody who wants to go on the road and be a manager, collect the money, you know, do all the business on the road?" And I went, "Well, what does it pay?" And I think it was like $1,000 or $2,000 a week. All your airfare, all your food, all your hotel accommodations, everything is covered. And I went, "Yeah, I'll do it." He goes, "You'll do it?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'll tell you what, those tapes that you're using to sing behind, they were basically what we call needle drops. They got to the B-sides of the instrumentals, and they edited them together, and they were basically singing to the old tracks." And I said, no. Let's clean this up. Let's do newer versions. Let's spice up what you have. And I basically worked on the show with them. When I started with Village People, they were getting $1,500. When I finished with Village People, they were getting $35,000 to do more or less the same show. So that was a big jump, and we cleaned that show up, and, you know, it was really, 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 really great. They did hour and a half long shows. We went to Australia several times. I remember one time we went to Iceland. It was in the middle of February. The sun came up at 10 o'clock in the morning and went down at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There was like barely any sun. It was the highest levels of alcoholism and suicide in the world at that time. It was completely insane. We fell asleep. We woke up the next day, and the snow was literally over the first story window. And, you know, they had snowplows and dug it out, but the plane couldn't land. I remember when the plane landed, it was like The Shining, not The Shining, John Carpenter's The Thing, because there was no runway. There were just poles showing where the runway was underneath the deep snow. So we played a club there, and it's funny, there was no gay bar. We didn't play gay bars. We played mostly straight clubs. We played from tiny little clubs to, I remember we did the rugby finals at halftime show, like football halftime, at Sydney Stadium in front of 80,000 people. So we went from tiny little clubs to massive stadiums and we toured around the world. I mean, I got to see places that I never saw before. And I remember this, we played a club, and over in the corner were like 3 or 4 tables, and that was the gay bar, the gay section, which was really funny because they didn't have enough gay people to do a full bar. And the guys are singing and performing, and all of a sudden this little old lady, I mean grandma, like wretched little old lady, she goes up to the front, and I'm mixing the live show because I produced a lot of the music, and I was mixing it live. The guys used to introduce me as the 7th village person. And there's Man Parrish back there. So this little old lady comes up from the back row. She stands up in front of the stage, and the guys are looking down like, what are you doing here? And she goes like this, and she lifts her shirt and shows them her tits. And the guys are like mortified, and all of a sudden all the singers like broken because they're like, this like 85-year-old woman with these pancake flat tits just showed her a tit. So David, the construction worker, who I love dearly to this day, in the back of his shirt, he sewed letters in upside down that say, show us your tits. And then during one of the dance routines, he would turn around and flip up the back of his shirt and would say, show us your tits, which was a great little homage to that woman, and people loved it in the show. So to do the Village People, they had to pay, since they didn't own the Village People, this producer did, who wound up losing in court. I'll tell you that in a second. But he charged them, I think it was $20 or $30 or $40,000 a year to use the Village People name so they can go around the world and perform these songs, so they could make money, which they'd put in the bank. And then they're very smart. Instead of just splitting the money up at the end of the night, they did a corporation. They put the money in the bank, and they gave themselves health insurance, and they paid each other weekly salaries. So if there was a time when you didn't have money, there would always be a check coming in every week. That was really smart, really cool. One of the times, we used to go to Australia all the time. I talk about hanging out with Tabitha from Bewitched, and we went to Japan on an overnight for a TV show after coming back from a month in Australia. We were in Germany. We were in Berlin, and we were playing East Berlin, doing some national TV show for the communists, and then West Berlin, a day or two later, something called a Tunten Ball or something like that. It's this high society ball where you dress up in tuxedos, and they would have old school, like Las Vegas drag queens coming down from the ceiling on carousel horses, and drag queens with black leopards and tigers walking across the stage, and it was just this whole rule of success. And that's when the wall was up, and Berlin was a very small city. West Berlin was a very small city. It was walled in. People don't realize that West Berlin was in the middle of communist Berlin, and there was only one road that went in and out, and they had fences on either side. And if you stopped your car and got out of your car and tried to go across the fence, they'd shoot you. So there was this one road with no gas stations that would go all the way from East Berlin all the way through to the west part of Germany, or you flew in like we did. And there was a wall around the city, and we went through Checkpoint Charlie, which is a very famous checkpoint. And they had us in a van. It was the East Germans taking us over, and they took all of I held the passports, and, they had to stamp them through to get to East Germany. And the promoter from East Berlin, I need your passports, in broken English. We got it. And they stamped it. I said, okay. They passed us through Checkpoint Charlie. If you're a Westerner, your card would be searched, you'd be questioned, but we were part of the government. We zoomed right through. And I said, okay, can I have the passports back? He goes, no, I do not give you passports. And I said, what do you mean you don't give me the passports? He goes, you be good and you'll get your passports. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I could keep them and you'll stay here. You won't ever see home again. And I went, oh my God, the guys didn't know this. I thought, oh my God, sorry guys, we have to live here. You'll never see your families or your friends or your girlfriends and boyfriends again. Sorry. So we did this TV show, and we get back to the dressing room, and the guy pulls me over and he goes, okay, get the guys, we do one more show. And I said, one more show? I said, we're booked to do this show. It was a variety show, and the Village People sang YMCA and in the Navy Macho Man, and that's it. He goes, no. You come downstairs. Now we're going to shoot our Christmas special. I said, well, we weren't paid for that. He goes, that's right. And if you want to leave the country, you want your passports back, you better do the show. And I went upstairs to the guys and I said, guys, he's got our passports, and they're threatening us that if we don't do this other show, we're going to sit in Germany, East Germany and communist Germany for the rest of our lives. I said, what do we do? And everybody said, just do the show. Let's see, another 40 minutes. Let's just 20 minutes, whatever. We'll do 3 songs. Just get out of here. And we got out of there. When I was in East Germany, the hotel that we stayed at was a Western hotel. It was about a 1-star Holiday Inn kind of thing. It was 1950s looking. They had to order food ahead of time because there was no refrigeration or proper refrigeration. So all the lettuce and the cucumbers and the carrots and tomatoes were all pickled because the salt would preserve it. The food was like salty beef and dried fish, and it was really disgusting. And when you went from the West Berlin with all these cabarets and neon signs and life, you went into East Germany and it was like dead quiet, no color. And the hotel they were in, they were all like little pockmarks on the wall outside. And I said, what the hell is that? He goes, that's when, they came and they sprayed the place with bullets. And I got a chill down my spine. And then went up into the room, and I remember the toilet paper was like a paper bag. Because I remember someone said, you better bring your own toilet paper. I'm like, yeah, right. The toilet paper was like rough, horrible, like when you go to school and you pull that brown paper towel out to wipe your hands. That was what you wiped your butt with. It was horrible. And when I looked out the window, the building across the way from me was partially destroyed, but in the part where the other part that was standing, people were living there. So the lights were on, and then like the next apartment over was like crumbled down to the floor. Unless like somebody bombed out the side of the building. We were told we couldn't leave. Don't leave the hotel. If you did, don't talk to anybody. Any of the East Berliners. If you did, we'd be in trouble. I remember when we did the show. I had to bring, I think we had stuff both on digital audio tape DAT and on CD because not everybody had a digital audio player, which I carried. It was like a Walkman, a digital audio player, very first Sony DAT machine. And I also had a backup on CD just in case if I couldn't plug it in. And I went into this recording truck, which was outside, and this was a theater. And the guys there flipped out. They heard of the Sony portable Walkman, but they never saw it before. And when I looked down, the mixing boards were like those old 1950s mixing boards with round knobs and giant meters. And it was really, really primitive. And they had, because of communism, they didn't have anything new. They were working with like 1960s, mixing boards, and they gathered all these guys around and they were hanging over my shoulder and how does this work? And this is digital. We heard of this, and they were examining it and passing it around. And then comrade, a supervisor, somebody came in and they all scattered. We did the show. We went back to West Berlin. I think we had a day off. I walked around Berlin a little bit. I saw the wall. Pretty incredible. And the night we were supposed to do the Totenball, it was, I think we got left around 8 o'clock for a 10 o'clock show. Around 7 o'clock, I hear, buddy, it's okay. My dog. There was something going on, and I went out on the balcony in Berlin to see what's going on, and it was like it's right by, we stayed in a hotel right by where the famous churches, that burnt out church in West Berlin. We were like just right on the same block or right next to it. And all these people were walking protesting. A crowd was pushing up one side of the street. I have video of it somewhere, not on YouTube. And the cops were pushing back, and, you know, they were writing because the wall was coming down. And I thought, oh my God, how's the bus going to pull up being a road manager? I'm not thinking that this is like a major piece of history where communism falls. I'm more worried, like, you know, I was like Shirley Partridge on the bus, you know, driving the bus with the Partridge family. Shut up, sit down. You know, that was me, all right? I was more worried about my boys and getting them to this thing than the fact that history was unfolding right under my nose. And I went downstairs to the lobby to figure out how we can get the tour bus around to get the guys on it. And they were hammering up plywood against the windows because they thought people were going to riot and break the windows. So they figured out they'd get the bus two blocks over. And we went out through the kitchen and then into a basement and then came back up again carrying all the bags. And we went down this little narrow alleyway until we went 2 blocks down away from the crowds. And it was like a you know, a spy movie. We got to the corners and we were looking, and there were people all the way down here, and they were throwing stuff, and people here were starting the riot. And I was like, all right, come on, hurry up, quick. We went another block and we got into the bus, and we went and we did this Tuttenball, which is amazing. And the next day, I think we had a day off before we left, and the wall came down. And I left the hotel, and there was the wall's coming down. And I went downstairs and I ran over to the Brandenburg Gate, which was right there. And Peter Jennings from ABC News was on a scaffolding, and all these news crews were there. And people were chopping away at the wall and drinking champagne. And you could see pieces of the wall. I grabbed it. I have a piece. I don't have it with me right now, but I grabbed it. I have a piece of the wall. It basically just looked like I could have picked up any cement in a construction site, you know, but it was a piece of the wall I have somewhere. And as the wall chipped down, there was a big buffer zone, which was a minefield. And the other guys, there were armed guards, and they were really nervous because there were 3 or 4 of them and a couple of 100,000 people on this side of the wall standing on it and breaking it down. But it was amazing to be part of that history. And I think I have a T-shirt that says, you know, Berlin Wall with, was it 1989 or something? I got to go look at the Google of whatever year it was, but I was there. Pretty amazing, thanks to Village people. A couple more years passed. We went to Australia. I came back, and I found out. Well, we came back from Australia, and suddenly one of the guys in the band, his boyfriend was the manager at that time. They didn't really have management, but he was the manager. And it turns out that one of the other guys in the group wanted his brother to become road manager. So how are they going to get me out? Well, this guy from the group who wanted his brother and this manager decided they were just going to ask for, you know, the tapes back, which I owned, which I did. And they weren't going to pay me. They were just going to get me out one day and get his brother in. They were doing a big show at Duke University in, was it Washington, D.C.? It was like a $35,000, $40,000 show, and it was a big auditorium filled with people. I suddenly get this phone call that says, hey, Manny, we need the tapes for this weekend. I said, well, what do you mean you need the tapes this weekend? I'm the road manager. I carry the tapes. He goes, no, we need them, and we're going to, like, edit them. I said, why do you need to edit them? I've been with the group for 6 years, never stole a penny, handled millions of dollars of money. We carry around 30, 40, 60, 80, $100,000 in a little belly bag. You know, I swept up after these guys, got them awake, put them asleep, and shadowed one of them. He used to go in the bars at night and get drunk to make sure that he got back to the hotel room so he'd get on a plane the next day. And people would call me in my house, you know, at 6 o'clock in the morning. Oh, what time is it over there? Yeah, no, call the booking agency. I don't book them. Oh, can you do us a deal? No, call. So, you know, I lived Village people. I mean, I woke up and didn't know in my own bed and didn't know where I was. I was the first person awake, last person asleep. I would get those guys upgrades. I would go we'd travel on United Airlines, coach to Australia, 36 hours in those days. And I would go up and say, hey, do you know who that is there? And like, no. I said, that's the Village people. And, oh my God, hold on, let me get you an autograph. And what's your manager's name? Mike? Okay. Hey, guys, sign to Susan and to Mike. Here you go. Oh my God, the Village people thing. By the way, are there any seats in first class? And I got us upgraded a couple of times $10,000 seats to first class. I remember there was nobody in first class but us. And all the stewards and the stewardesses were sitting up there. And the pilot, it was a 747, the pilot came down the stairs from above. What's going on? The bell's ringing and people want service. They said, oh, it's the village people. He goes, oh, the hell with the people. Come on, let's all hang out. And they opened a bottle of champagne and they baked us cookies and fried chicken. We were only people in first class. So anyway, I busted my ass to the guys. And they demand, the manager called me and said, well, so-called manager called me and said, I demand you give me those tapes or else. I said, what are you talking about? I said, if you're going to, what's going on? You don't need to know. All you need to do is give me your tapes. Give me the tapes. I said, I'm not giving you the tapes because now something's going on. He goes, if you don't give me those tapes, I'm going to this and I'm going to that. I said, listen, those tapes are my tapes technically because you didn't pay for them. You can go back to your old reel-to-reel. And I had done a couple of original songs with them and a couple of remakes like Wind Beneath My Wings and all that kind of stuff. You can't have it. You got to pay me for it. I'm going to sue and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I said, you paid me to be a road manager. You didn't pay me to produce your show. I did that out of kindness. And for 6 years, I've never been late. I've never screwed anything up. I've delivered you money all the time, including taking pillowcases full of 1s and 5s to my hotel room and counting out $20,000 because they didn't have big bills. I mean, and traveling with it, right? Putting it in the bank on the road. So I'm giving you to tonight and then this. And I thought, you know what? Fuck you guys. You're good. And I thought the guys knew about this. It turns out they didn't know about this because later on, years later, I talked to one of them and he said, well, I'll tell you what happened first. And they thought I sabotaged their show. So I thought, okay, you guys, I've been good to you. I kissed your ass. You get the idea. I don't want to go on and on. So I said, all right, you want to be like that? They had a digital audio tape and it would queue up like a CD. And then they would go Y, M, C, A, and you'd hit play and they would be in position and do choreography. Some of the songs would have like 16 beats of an intro where they would dance and they had to turn around and be in front of the microphone on beat 17-1. But what I did is I adjusted all the start times on all the songs. So when you hit Y, M, C, A, they're standing there like that and 2 minutes of silence. Now on those digital audio tapes, you can't just fast forward because it's data. You can't like move the tape in here and cue it up like a DJ record. So I totally destroyed their show. In the middle of the song, it suddenly went silent for 30 seconds and then came on again. I created such havoc on that stage because that was a real fuck you. And the guys didn't talk to me for the longest time, and rightly so, because they were told that I quit. And in doing quitting, I sabotaged their show. It wasn't until later, and maybe some of them are listening to this now, some of them are gone, passed away, but some of them listening to me now realize what happened. That manager, whose name begins with an M, him and one of the other guys who wanted his brother in, decided to do this to me. And I never quit, guys. I never did. I never quit. And I did take revenge because I worked. I said, well, if you don't want me to work, give me this show. Let me finish my paycheck. And no, fuck you. Fuck you. So that's why I wound up leaving the Village People. I was pushed out because somebody's brother needed a job, which wasn't fair. And we would go to, one of the guys in the group didn't like it because when we went to England and got off stage, a lot of people came to me and asked for autographs, and he was standing next to me, and I remember this, and he got really twisted that they didn't go to him. He had quite an ego. He once told me in Iceland in the middle of the winter that there was no mayonnaise in the dressing room for his sandwich, and if there wasn't mayonnaise, he wasn't going to go on stage, and somebody had to go drive in a car for like a half hour in the middle of a snowstorm in the middle of February in Iceland to knock on a door at somebody's house to get mayonnaise so this prima donna prick could go on stage. You don't know what I put up with. I put up with a lot of shit. But it was a great experience. I got to travel the world for free. There's some of my Village People stories. I have other ones too, been all around the world. But that's a whole synopsis. Karma. When the Village People... After me, they went through a couple of incarnations. So one of the guys passed away. One guy retired. They replaced him with other people. Suddenly, the original lead singer, Victor Willis, came out of, not out of hiding, but he used to party. Let's put it that way. So he married a woman who was a lawyer, and she said, you probably have a lot of royalties here, and you wrote these songs. So when they looked it up, it said that their producer and this manager, who never wrote anything, like what happened to me, somebody else is claiming the rights to your song, and he wasn't had it together enough to sue. He wound up suing them, the manager, and got the rights to the Village People name, I think in America or something. It could be worldwide, I don't remember. And he came back and he fired everybody in the band, making all those people that were pushing Village People around for 20 some odd years, they all were suddenly didn't have jobs. They were suddenly unemployed. And he turned to one of them, because that person told me, and the guys were making $30,000, $40,000. He offered him $800, or his wife did, offered him $800 to come work with the new Village People to tour the world, and he went, get out of here. So the guys then suddenly they weren't allowed to use the Village People name, so they used Kings of Disco. I don't know if they're still doing the Kings of Disco, but if you want to see what's left of the Village People, they now lost the Village People name. Victor Willis went out with a whole new Village People band, and when they went to Australia, they played a whole bunch of shows, and a large portion of the shows he got booed because it was so horrible. So there's Village People history. It started out with a producer right around the village, and darling, I want you. Randy Jones, a cowboy, was a dancer for Grace Jones. Because I saw him at Lamouche in 1976 or something like that. 74, whatever that date was back then. And Jacques Morelli was there that night. And darling, I want you to be in my group. And then Felipe with his headdress at the end, darling, I want you to be in my group. And he's got a cowboy, he's got an Indian, and he was going to put all these people together. And one of them told me Jacques Morelli came into the recording studio because they sang vocals, but they were only paid a weekly salary. A few of them had a royalty deal where they were getting a small amount of royalties, but nothing what they would deserve, because these guys didn't write the music, but they sang on it. They did all the live shows and all that kind of stuff. And Jacques Morelli came in with a fur coat and rings, and darlings, you like my fur coat? You like my rings? Like, oh, yes, mistress. Yeah, yes, it's beautiful. Good. Sing some more and you buy me some more. There were stories that Jacques Morelli would ride around in a limo and have the limo driver pull over and see a straight guy on the street and, darling, I give you $10,000 to have sex with you right now. And he did. He had $10,000 in his pocket, waved it to some guy, brought him in the car, blew him in the back, and threw him out on the next corner and gave him 10 grand. But he didn't give money to the guys that actually helped put Village People together. That's my Village People story. YMCA, which we used to sing, Why I'm So Gay, right? Why I'm So Gay. YMCA. We're coming to the end of my book series. I'm going to do one or two more. I got a Boy George story to tell, and then probably wrap this series up, but it's going to stay up. And you can go and binge watch. Thank you for watching. Thanks for the incredible support. It's been really, really great so far. And I think what I may do is another channel, but I'm going to do an end piece, like an end chapter to a book, and I'll talk all about that. I'll do another channel and keep this stuff going. Thank you so much. You guys have been amazing. The response, the comments, the love, amazing. Let's try to turn this into a Netflix series. Anybody out there know anybody on Netflix? Let's do this. Well, this is I guess the last video in the series. It's a juicy one. This is my Boy George story and the truth of what I went through. But this story is so heavy that I'm going to break it into two parts. I'm only going to tell you part one. I'm saving part two for a book or a Netflix series or something like that. Because if I tell that, I mean, literally, I would have the world's press on my doorstep from stuff that I've heard. So it's not going to happen. So, but what I will tell you is what led up to my friend's death in London. My friend died in Boy George's house, and his mother went over. There was an investigation through Scotland Yard, and stuff she told me directly was pretty deep. And if I said it now, I'd have to literally have news cameras on my thing. Anyway, let's forget about that. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what happened, because I wasn't in London when that happened, by the way. So that's all hearsay. But I will tell you my Boy George story, and a lot of my close friends know this, and I'm telling it. There was a club in New York called Area Club, and it was amazing. It was basically this warehouse, and every month they would close for a couple of days, and they would completely renovate the place. I mean, put up new walls. Once they dug a hole in the floor and put a glass over it, and there were sharks swimming underneath it. The other time I went in, and the place had giant bushes that were like 7 feet high, and the whole club with the disco system and the lights was a maze, and you made your way into the middle of the dance floor. One time they had holes in the wall and people's heads stuck through that were like live statues that would occasionally just move and stuff like that. To be on their mailing list was amazing. Like for Halloween, they send you a box with a fake dead finger in it. They'd send you a handkerchief with whatever their party was that day. They were known to be very exclusive, very hard to get into. It was like a downtown underground Studio 54. It was after Studio 54 when the Palladium was open and the whole Studio 54 thing fell apart. But truly amazing, really amazing, right? They opened for a couple of years, and every month it was something completely different. Just unbelievable. So one of my friends stuck his head through the wall. His name was Zet. His real name was Bernard, but Zette, and I wound up producing a chic record, Zet and the Freak, with him. He sang in a deep voice, but he was a performance artist, and he would do stuff at the club, and he was kind of well known. And one day I get a phone call, like on a Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday night. Zed calls me up and says, Boy George was just in the club. And I went, oh, how cool, right? Yeah, that's cool. He wants to work with you. And I went, me? He goes, yeah, him and his friend Marilyn. It's George's birthday party coming up next week, or in 2 weeks, or whatever the time frame it was, within a week or two. And Marilyn is supposed to surprise George with a song on stage at the Palladium. And I said, oh, and they want you to produce it. I went, oh, great. Well, give them my number. You hang up the phone and you go, yeah, whatever, somebody was drunk or high and said something. Anyway, a couple of days later, I get a phone call. I pick up the phone. Hello, this is George. And I was like, oh, yeah, I know you're going to call. Hi, what's up? Well, listen, we're going to do the song. We're going to do Spirit in the Sky. We're going to do it at the Palladium. It's supposed to be a surprise for my birthday, but I know about it. So, I'm going to take control of the whole thing. And I said, oh, okay, great. And how about we come to your studio in Brooklyn? I think he called me like on a Saturday or a Sunday. Tomorrow, Monday, I said, okay. I said, I have a very little small studio in my bedroom, but don't worry, I'll work something out where we can get stuff done. And hung up the phone. Oh, he said he was going to be there 3:00 the next day. Hung up the phone. And of course I scrambled. I called Michael Rudetsky, who's the guy who died in his apartment, in his house. Michael was my very best friend. He was straight. We were not lovers, any kind of stupid stuff like that. But he was my really, really closest, best friend. I could tell him anything. He could tell me anything. We were buddies, and all that kind of stuff. And Michael was a genius. He was great at writing music. He went to Oberlin College and knew, he went to Berkeley. He went to Berkeley and knew music theory when I couldn't read or write music. So Michael comes over the next day, dressed up. I'm there. I had told my sister that Boy George was coming, and I lived on 73rd Street in Bay Parkway, Brooklyn, in a little semi-detached house, like an Archie Bunker house, but bigger, two houses attached in the center. And my sister told the whole neighborhood, because they knew her brother was Man Parrish, told the whole neighborhood that Boy George was coming. And this is really at the height of his career. And George was supposed to come at 3 o'clock. And around 2 o'clock, I noticed people like standing behind trees and, gathering around the front of the house. And I'm like, I was on the second floor and I leaned down and what's going on? We're here to see Boy George. And I said, no, that's just a lie. Well, obviously you're all dressed up. Something's going on. I said, no. And more people. And when I tell you, you look at those pictures of 10 people abreast hanging out in front of a place, all, standing there. I said, George is not going to come. He knows you're here. The limousine is down the block. There's a spy. I made up some sort of story. There's a spy. And when you guys clear out, George is just going to show up because he doesn't want to be hassled by people. And it's around 3 o'clock and the crowd scatters and people are suddenly sitting on the porches across the street of houses that aren't even theirs. And every porch had somebody on it. And, the driveways, people are leaning against the driveway smoking cigarettes in houses that, on other people's property because Boy George was going to come. So 3 o'clock comes, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. It's starting to get dark. And I turned to Michael and, we had catered food. The little money that I had, I went out to the Italian deli. I didn't know what to do. And I got a tray of, like prosciutto and mozzarella and, I did the best I could, right? And some soda and, all that kind of stuff. And I said, I don't think George is coming. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I said, you know what? Let's everybody go home. This was a farce. I probably didn't even speak to George. And just as Michael's head and I were heading down the stairs, I was going to say goodbye to him downstairs at the front door. I hear screaming outside, like the Beatles showed up. And I run upstairs and I look out the window and I see a limo pulling down. The window's open and Marilyn's looking out of the window like, where the hell are we in the middle of Brooklyn? Kids are screaming and starting to get there. I said, Michael, you better get down there. I live in a tough neighborhood in Brooklyn. These guys are going to rip them apart, right? So Michael goes down, opens the door, and I'm upstairs now. I'm nervous. I've never met Boy George before. You know what I mean? It's a big deal. George comes up in the house, and I'm 6'4". George is tall like me. People think he's a small little petite guy. He's a big, tall dude like me, right? And eye to eye, and hello. Please, so you're Man Parrish? I said, yeah. Do I call you Boy George? Mr. O'Dowd? You go, just George. I said, okay, great. I didn't have much furniture in my house. I had come from the city. I lost my loft. I had a round wooden table, and we all sat down, and George said, look, we're going to do this. I said, yeah. I had called my friend Steve Remote, who's an amazing engineer. He had a recording truck. He put it in the drive. We managed to just barely get it between the two buildings in the driveway. And we rented a $10,000 Fairlight synthesizer from Audio Force. Something called Audio Toys. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was like $200 or $300 for that. The truck was $5,000, which was fine. And then I normally charge, when you have a big recording artist, back in those days, you charge a producer with a name, which is what I had, charged $10,000, but I was going to do it for $5,000 because it was George and I really wanted to work on this project and have it as a credit, right? So basically there's a $10,000 bill sitting there, round up a $10,000 bill. So George comes up, sits on tape. Look, we're going to put this record out. We're going to split it, 3-4 ways. Everybody has even credits and so on and so on and so on. And let's get to work. I said, great. He goes, where's your studio? I said, I got a surprise. I got a professional 24-track recording truck in the driveway. We rented a $100,000 Fairlight synthesizer, which is what Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Grace Jones and Art of Noise and all these big groups used. And, we're professional sound, professional recording and all that. We walk downstairs. My father opens up the door and sees him. Now, George wasn't in makeup. People think he walks around like that. No, he just looked like some guy, you know what I mean? He had, I think he had a little stubble, just a tall, dude, dressed in dark. And my father said, oh, Mr. George, do I call you boy or do I call you George? Pleased to meet you. And he goes, oh, honey, I don't care what you call me. Don't dish me. And my father goes, what? I said, never mind, Dad, never mind. We go down, we go in my driveway, we get up into the truck, and we start doing the basics for Spirit in the Sky. Marilyn sat off to the side, and he was getting tired really quickly. He didn't like the fact that, he was just sitting there, and we're doing a lot of technical programming on the Fairlight and figuring out which bass lines to use. And that was around 9, 10 o'clock at night. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Marilyn says, I'm going to go out. I'm going to get some fresh air. And he opens the door of the truck, it was air conditioned, and steps outside. It was the summertime, and takes off. And then about an hour later, I went, Marilyn didn't come back. I live in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. These dudes will hang them from the, Marilyn had like a pashmina, and she was fierce. And I said, they'll hang him from the street lamps. And George says, don't worry, I'll go get him. I'll go get him. George steps out of the thing. We work on a little more about 4:30. And I remember because it was just barely starting to get light. It was still dark, but almost starting to get light because the sun came up around 5 o'clock in the morning in the summer. I said, you know what? I'm going out there. Something's wrong. Neither one of them have come back. And I go outside, and Marilyn's laying across the bricks on my house, and George is pitching, pennies, against the wall of the bricks of my house, with Vinny, who had white sneakers on and just a little white, disco shorts, no shirt, and a gold chain. And I said, George, are you okay? He goes, get away. I'm fine. I'm like, okay, great. You guys are having fun. And suddenly I hear, and there's people hanging around watching George and Marilyn, and someone goes, Teresa, get the camera. And this other woman came with a tray with coffee and donuts. And, we finished up stuff. We left around 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And packed everything down. His limo came, and then he left. The next morning, I get a phone call around 9 at 10 a.m. I didn't realize George had been up all night. We're going to move this to the Hit Factory in New York. I think it was the Hit Factory. And we're going to, take the 24-track tape and finish it there. I'm like, okay, great. And I called Steve, and I said, look, I'll get you your money, Steve Remote. I'll get you your money. You know what I mean? George has to pay me. I'll pay you. Everything's cool, and everything's fine. We worked Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at the Hit Factory, finishing up Spirit in the Sky. He wanted background singers. He hired Jocelyn Brown, somebody else's guy, and Diva Gray. And I can't remember what group Diva Gray is, forgive me. But she wasn't Patti LaBelle's backup singer, but some group like that. She was a big backup singer and soulful stuff. Now, I remember when we were in the studio, Michael would take the Long Island Railroad into Brooklyn on the subway, meet me, and then we would both go into Manhattan on the N train and get off at 57th Street, 51st Street, the local, 49th Street, and then walk up to 57th Street and walk down to 54th Street where the studio was. I mean, we were so poor. I mean, I borrowed money from my father to get on the subway kind of a deal, or Michael lent it to me or something like that. And I had my $1,000 Lynn drum machine, I remember, the last day. And we were sitting there. We didn't have money for food. We got there at 2 p.m, and it went until 5 or 6 the next morning. We were really punching this out. And we were starving. And George had ordered a giant buffet of food and sat there and ate it in front of us. And we must have looked like the two kids in The Little Rascal pushing our nose against the glass, as he's eating. We were, in the same room. But I remember we were like the Little Rascals. Our stomachs were growling. He didn't offer us anything. He didn't have to. But, I mean, really didn't say, hey, you guys hungry? You've been here for 9 hours already. I'm ordering all this food. Okay, whatever. Fuck you. Whatever. So, Michael, I think, had money to go home, but I didn't. And I said, Michael, can you lend me money to get home? I've got the Lynn drum, I don't want to really go on the subway, but he was going to go to his girlfriend's house. And he says, I don't have it. I just have whatever it was, $1 to get on the subway or something like that. And Michael left around 3 o'clock in the morning. And actually, before he left, George had this wad of money. You ever see when the gangsters have wads of money? And he peeled off a couple of $100 for Jocelyn Brown, a couple of $100 for Diva Gray for doing background vocals. We were standing in the hallway right in front of him watching him. And they left, and then shortly after Michael left, and I was there with George, and I said, George, you're going to be another hour or two. you have a limousine sitting outside with the engine running, which you pay for by the hour. I'd like to go home to Brooklyn. I don't care that it's a limo. I just don't want to take this $1,000 drum machine on New York City subway where you get mugged, through Times Square in the middle of the night. I didn't even have a bag to put it in. And George said, don't worry, you can use the car, but wait till I'm finished. It's going to drop me off at the Helmsley Palace, and then I'll have the car take you back to Brooklyn, and then he could leave. Okay, and I remember sitting there, I was exhausted, I was tired, barely keep my eyes open. We finish up at 6 a.m., it was just light outside. George says, come on, get in the car. Okay, I get in the car, and asking me some questions, being friendly, small talk. I mean, we were talking the whole time, small talk. We get to the Helmsley Palace. George opens the door and reaches in, reaches his hand, and he says, come on, get out. And I said, wait, I'm going to go to Brooklyn. Oh, no, this car has to go home. I'm going to call you another car. And of course, stupid, I'm going, okay, just come on upstairs. Okay, So I have my drum machine. I go up to George's. He stayed at the Helmsley Palace. It was a 2-story high suite. It was on the corner of the Helmsley Palace, right by St. Patrick's Cathedral on 5th Avenue, Madison Avenue entry, something like that. It was right there. The place was a mess. And I remember he had the photo proofs. He had that album cover where it was red. He had like the red china. It was like almost a Chinese chandelier he was wearing on his head. He had the Leica 4x5 prints, and some of them were circles and some of the X. He was going through the proof sheets to see which one he liked. And he had a shirt, and I think somebody said it was made by Paco Rabanne. It was all those pull top. In the old days, Pepsi cans had pull tops that you would take off, and there would be a ring and a little piece of metal. And they wound up outlawing them to the new ones we have now, because those were littered all over New York City and all of these places. And somebody had taken them and braided them together into this incredible shirt. I remember lifting it. Some famous designer, fashion people out there probably know what that is. So we're up there, we sit on the couch, and it's becoming clear that George is putting the moves on me. And I said, George, I just want to go home. Well, come on, why don't you just sleep in the other room with me? I want to go home. What's the big deal? Come on, we can have some fun. I want to go home. I was a pretty little boy, I don't, people hit up on me, but no, I'm not in the mood for this. It's 6 a.m. I haven't been up all night, and I don't want to go in the other room. And after 3 or 4 attempts of no, George went into the other room, came out with a pillow and a blanket and threw it at me and said, I'll deal with you in the morning. Went back into his room, slammed the door, and fell asleep. I got up around noon. I slept on the couch. I don't have any money. I have my drum machine. And I said, God, I want to go home. We have to be at the Palladium tonight. We have to be there around 4 or 5 o'clock for rehearsal or something like that. It was almost noon, and I wanted to go home and take a shower. I didn't want to shower and get naked around him, you know what I mean, in that place. I just wanted to go home. I was a kid. I wanted to go home. Put my drum machine down. Didn't want to take it to the Palladium, have it stolen, or leave it in George's place there. So I knock on his bedroom door, and no answer. And I thought, let me wait a half hour, and I'm looking, and it's 12:30. Knock on the door, 1 o'clock, and he said, what do you want? And I said, please, George, I just want to go home. All I want to do is go home. He says, hold on a second. He slams the door, and he opens it again. He takes $1, and he throws it at me. He says, take the fucking subway, and slams the door on me. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. I called a friend of mine who had a car. I said, are you in the city by any chance? She goes, yes. I said, could you please take me home? I just want to go home. So she took me home. Later that night, I got on the subway. Afternoon, actually, I turned around, put the drum machine down, got dressed for the evening. We were performing that night at the Palladium. Took the subway back to 14th Street, went to 14th Street. We had a rehearsal around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The place was empty at the Palladium. If you don't know, the Palladium was Studio 54, version 2.0, Steve in Schrager and Steve Rubell. Some people had invested, and this was 5 times the size of Studio 54, and pretty amazing. In fact, the DJ booth, it looked like Hollywood Squares, the TV show, and up at the top was a DJ booth, or the second from the top was a DJ booth VIP area, which took up this whole giant space and had like a library in it, and like a wet bar and couches, you know, and DJ could host celebrities and friends up there while they looked down 2 stories onto the crowd down there. It was a massive place. And I remember they're setting up the stage, they're getting the sound ready, and all of a sudden this girl comes flying in. Where's my boyfriend? What? And security comes after her. You know, where's my boyfriend? You know, Jimmy, I know you're in here and you're with that whore, Boy George. And I went, oh, ooh. You know, we're like, ooh. And we knew that George was up there because we saw this guy up there making out with this dude. We're getting married tomorrow and it's off. And we were like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Security pulls her out, right? So Michael and I waited around Manhattan, the Palladium from then until like 11 o'clock midnight backstage. Well, you know, we didn't have enough money to go out and eat or anything like that, but we're going to do this thing. So we did Spirit in the Sky. Marilyn and George sang. Diva Gray, Jocelyn Brown, Boy George, Marilyn, me, Michael Radetsky were on stage, and I was faking a keyboard that they had rented and that kind of stuff. And the Palladium was completely packed with people. I'd say the place held 3,000 or 4,000 people. And upstairs in the back, they had something called the Michael Todd Room, which was like the big club within a club, and that was packed with people. We do the show, and just a sea of people, you know, people hanging off of railings and off of the balconies and the staircase. I mean, it was packed, because the radio had announced that George was going to be at the Palladium, and that his fan club, they let like I think he said 1,000 people from his fan club come in. So after the show, they were going to have a little champagne toast up in the back of the plate in the Michael Todd Room. George doesn't travel with security or anything, and I'm a tall guy. So me and 3 other guys put their arms around and made a circle around George, because we were tall, bouncer kind of dudes. And we walked George through the crowd of pushing people, you know, and George is there sweating with makeup, and he's taking his little powder puff and reapplying his makeup. We get up there, and it's a little more controlled chaos, but it's really crazy, and it's super hot. And then it was like, forget it, we're going to Area Club, because they were going to do an after party called Breakfast in Bed with Boy George. And it was Cornelia Guest, Art Corey Hay. I can't remember some of the other people that were hosting this, you know, this party at Area. And they're like, are you going? George is like, are you going? I said, yeah. We'll figure out a way. We found some people that were going down. Oh no, we got George downstairs and into his limo, and it took off. George didn't invite me in the limo, I guess, whatever, you know, he didn't have to. And we managed to find somebody who was going down there in a cab. Hey, can we go with you? We get down there, we go to the party, and the Palladium is packed. They have like a big bed set up on a portable stage with a backdrop, and they made it look like, you know, in Macy's or in one of these Harrods, one of these stores where they'll have like a fake bedroom set up, you know what I mean? And there was a hot plate, and they were cooking pancakes or flapjacks or whatever you call them from your part of the world, you know, pancakes and eggs. And George was sitting in bed, and they were all goofing and feeding each other while people were dancing around them, right? And it was about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and, you know, stuff is going on, and George has an asthma attack. Now, I have asthma, so I know what it's like. And I thought, oh my God, it's really hot in here, bad for asthma. And stuff is going up his nose, and, you know, it's making it worse, and I can't breathe. And people go, oh, come on, just, you know, do this, take that, and you feel better. So I walked up to George and I said, I have asthma. Let me get you out of here. I didn't have an inhaler with me. Did I have an inhaler? I think I had Primatene Mist. And I did. I had Primatene Mist, I remember. I just grabbed him and I pushed him through the crowd and out through a set of doors into the back alleyway. And George is sitting down. I gave him the inhaling. I could breathe. I could breathe. And I noticed at the end of I said, let me get your car. You don't need to be here. You need to go home at 6 o'clock in the morning. Down at the end of the narrow alley, a photographer's coming up. And George panicked, and he took out his little makeup thing, and he's
putting makeup on because he's white and pale and splotchy and doesn't have air, just had an asthma attack. And this guy running up the alleyway, he's going to get the scoop. And I went on up to him and I said, listen, you motherfucker. I said, leave him alone. Don't you dare take a picture. The guy's like, yeah. I said, well, I'm from Brooklyn. If you do it, I'm going to beat the fucking shit out of you. And I was a big guy. I was a little guy. And I talked him down and I said, don't you dare tell anybody out there because I'll find you. And he went back out of the driveway figuring that George would have to come around the front to get back in and he would get his picture. I managed to put George off into a little corner and he's, catching his breath, putting on makeup. And I told the limo to come around the other side. He came down the alley from the other way, door open, put George in the car. And the limo pulled away and stopped and the window rolled down and I walked up and I said, are you okay? He reached a hand out. He says, I love you. Thank you so much. You saved my life. Thank you for caring for me. He says, you're a wonderful person. I'll never forget it. Thank you. Thank you. I said, don't worry about that. You just go home, back to the hotel. You relax, get some sleep. I'll check in with you tomorrow. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. I left, I think, because there's no other reason to be there. The party was over. Next day, around noon, 1 o'clock, I called to the Helmsley Palace. I had the number right up there and the room number. And Marilyn picks up the phone. I said, hi, it's Manny. Is George okay? Click. I was like, what? Call back again. Hello? Yeah, hi, it's Manny. We don't know any Manny. Hangs up the phone. And I went, oh, Jesus. Call back again. It's Man Parrish. Don't hang up the phone. Is George okay? Don't you ever call back here again. We don't know any Man Parrish. Fuck you. And hangs up the phone. And I was like, what the hell just happened? So I called Michael Radetsky. He was home on Long Island. I woke him up. I said, Michael, something's going on. George, they hung up on me. I saved this guy's life the night before, gave him an asthma inhaler, you know what I mean? And put him in his car. He said, let me call and see what's going on. So Michael called and talked to him, called me back about 20 minutes later. He goes, Manny, they don't want to be around you. I said, what did I do? He goes, you didn't do anything. He said, they told me that they didn't want to be around you because you didn't get high, you didn't do drugs, and you made them feel uncomfortable because you were the only sober person around. I've been in the music business. People have done coke and heroin and weed and drink. I don't care if you party or get high. I mean, it's part of the trademark of being in the business, right? Like, I'm going to judge, really? Seriously? So that was the story that I got. So later on, a couple of days later, Michael said, George called me and inviting me to do some music with him in London. I said, Michael, if you work with George, we're talking on the phone, I said, I'll never work with you again. I said, he owes me $10,000 in Skip Town, and there was some rumor about a fur coat, which I have to Google. It was just shady, and George had left town. And Michael's like, oh, come on, I got to do this. This is my real crack at doing something real music. I'm going to get to co-write this album. And I don't remember, it was a Culture Club album, or I think it was a first Boy George solo album. And I'm going to make some money and finally get somewhere in the business. I said, Michael, he's bad news. I'm telling you, I got screwed. You're going to get screwed. If you work with Michael, I will never work with you again, because I was protecting my best friend. Well, I'm going to stop the story just about here, because Michael wound up going to London. He told me he was going to his grandmother's house on the West Coast, and you could Google it. Michael died in George's apartment. What happened afterwards, his mother told me a story that's unbelievable. Now, there were two other little incidences. I was at the at Heaven Club in London. And I said, that's weird. George hasn't been around all week when we were there for the man-to-man thing. The publicist said that I flew to London. I was there illegally because you're supposed to get working permits to mix records. I was there to seek Boy George and beat him up because my friend died in his apartment and all that kind of stuff. So rumor had it that, this queen said that George didn't want to come out and go anywhere where I might go because I might beat him up in front of the newspapers, just to get my face in the picture again. So fast forward, I work with the Village people, and we played in something called a holiday camp, which is kind of like a vacation club, English style. They look like concentration camps. I used to joke because they would have all these bunks and, these buildings. And then there was a main building where you ate and another main building where they had shows. And these were quite popular. And our promoter, Tony Denton from England, that handled us as the Village People, also booked Boy George. George played Friday night, and I don't remember if it was George solo or Culture Club. It was probably George solo. And Saturday night, the Village People were headlining. So we went out a day early. They brought us in a day early to get over the jet lag, and just we could rehearse the next afternoon and all that kind of stuff. And George went on. We watched the show. And then I'm standing backstage, and our Village People dressing room was here, and George's was like the next one over. Crowded hallway between the Village People and Boy George and their entourage and people that managed to sneak backstage. It was really crowded. And I'm leaning against the wall. I think I was smoking cigarettes. I didn't want to smoke in front of the guys, if I remember. Smoking a cigarette. And the door opens, and George sticks his head out, and he's looking to see which one of his friends, and he zooms in on me, has this look on his face, and slams the door. And I thought, whatever, drama queen, whatever. I go back into the dressing room, put my cigarette out, and Tony Denton comes in and goes, "What did you do to Boy George?" I said, "What are you talking about? I smoking a cigarette in the hall." He said, he's upset or fearing for his life that you're here, and he immediately called for his car, and we were like 4 hours away from London, and he wants to go back to London immediately, and he just left, and he blamed it on you. And I thought, wow, I've got this much power over him? Whew, whatever, My friend Kobe Cole, Koehel, Kobe Cole, is an amazing singer. You can Google his stuff. He's got the voice of an angel, and I've worked with him. Boy George called him over to London to work with him. Thought he was the most incredible voice, what I do. And when he was over there, he asked Kobe, this is what Kobe told me now, he asked Kobe to sing some stuff, which Kobe did, and then he wanted Kobe to record or sing something derogatory in Yiddish, in Hebrew, because Kobe had been in Israel and learned the language and all that kind of stuff, and George wanted to sing something nasty, and he said, "I'm not going to do that." So what does George do? George kicked him out of the house with no airplane return ticket, no money, not a place to just threw him literally right out on the street. And George's brother had to come and take him off the street and bring him in and get him an airplane ticket home. So the George story is a mess. I got a whole other part of it, which I'm not going to tell until I get a book deal or some sort of a deal. But there's a lot of stuff going on there. That's my Boy George story. I've been telling it to my friends for years in bits and pieces. It's hot here today. I'm sweating. It's a warm day. Turn the air conditioner up. Anyway, that's my Boy George story. That's what happened. And I think this basically closes the video series. Tomorrow, the next thing is just going to be a final chapter epilogue, tidy up a few things, say why I'm doing this and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm thinking about maybe doing a new channel. So if you want to follow me over to another channel, subscribe to this, and I'll put up some sort of a notice. I'm thinking about doing some live stuff and maybe doing, for the tech heads, maybe peer over my shoulder as I'm mixing and recording so you could see how that process is done. I got to figure all that stuff out, but thank you so much. Please subscribe so I could stay in touch with you. I'm on Facebook, Man Parrish Artist. I'm on iTunes. Please buy my music. Don't steal it. And thank you so much for caring and watching, and comments are always appreciated. I love you guys so much. Thank you.